Hello everyone, and welcome back to Midnight Horror. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the video. Story 1. House sitting for my friend Emily seemed like an easy favor. She was going out of town for a week, and all I had to do was water her plants, feed her cat, and make sure everything stayed in order. I had stayed over at her place before, so it wasn't unfamiliar. It was a cozy little house in a quiet neighborhood, nothing out of the ordinary. I figured it would be a relaxing break from my own apartment, which was constantly noisy from neighbors and street traffic. The first few nights were uneventful. I worked remotely during the day, watched TV in the evenings, and went to bed early. Emily's cat, Oscar, was friendly enough, curling up beside me on the couch while I scrolled through my phone. The house was eerily quiet at night, but I told myself I wasn't used to the silence. It felt a little weird being in someone else's home alone, but that was normal, I thought. It wasn't until the fourth day that something strange happened. I was cleaning up after dinner when I accidentally dropped a fork under the kitchen table. Bending down to grab it, I noticed something unusual: pieces of paper taped to the underside of the table. My first thought was that Emily had left herself notes or something, but as I peeled one loose, my stomach clenched. They weren't notes, they were photographs. There were at least 10 of them, all taken from outside the house, through the windows. My breath caught in my throat as I spread them out on the table, my hands shaking. The pictures were of me sitting on the couch, working at the kitchen counter, even brushing my hair in the bathroom. Some were taken at night, the reflection of the camera's flash faintly visible in the glass. I felt sick. I had been alone in this house for days, completely unaware that someone had been watching me, photographing me. My first instinct was to check the doors and windows, making sure everything was locked. My mind was racing, trying to piece together when and how this could have happened. I had never noticed anyone outside, never heard anything unusual. But the photos were proof that someone had been close enough to see inside, close enough to capture my every move. I picked up one of the pictures and examined it closely. It had been taken the night before I recognized the clothes I had been wearing. That meant whoever was watching me had been outside recently, maybe even last night while I was sleeping. A chill ran down my spine at the thought of someone standing in the darkness, camera in hand, silently documenting my life. I grabbed my phone and called Emily, my voice trembling as I explained what I had found. She was immediately concerned, insisting she had no idea where the photos had come from. "I've never seen anything like that," she said, her voice tight with worry. "I don't know who could have done this." Her reaction only made me feel worse. If she wasn't behind it, then who was? Someone had gone through the trouble of taping these photos under her table. It wasn't just a random stalker, it was someone who had access to the house. My mind reeled with possibilities. Had someone broken in? Or had they been inside all along? I decided to do a full sweep of the house. I checked every closet, every corner, every locked door. I even pulled open the attic hatch, shining my flashlight into the dusty crawl space above. Nothing. No signs of forced entry, no obvious hiding spots. But that didn't make me feel any safer. Whoever had done this hadn't needed to break in, they had already been here at some point. As I moved through the house, I kept glancing out the windows, half expecting to see a shadow lurking in the yard. The neighborhood was eerily still, the streetlights casting long, empty stretches of pavement. My paranoia was growing by the second. I felt like I was being watched even now, like someone was standing just out of sight. I wanted to leave, to grab my bag and get out of that house as fast as possible. But something about the way the photos were hidden gnawed at me. If this person had gone through the trouble of taking them and carefully placing them under the table, they weren't just a random prowler. This was personal. I hesitated before checking one last place, Emily's bedroom. I hadn't spent much time in there, out of respect for her space, but now I felt like I needed to look. My heart pounded as I opened her closet, scanning the shelves and corners for anything unusual. At first, everything looked normal. Clothes hung neatly, shoes lined up against the back wall. But then I noticed something odd, a small box tucked behind some sweaters, partially hidden from view. I pulled it out and lifted the lid, my stomach twisting into knots. Inside were more photographs, dozens of them. And they weren't just of me. They were of Emily too. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. This had been going on for a while. Some of the photos of Emily looked old, taken months ago, maybe even longer. Many were taken from outside her house, just like mine had been. But there were also pictures of her in other places, walking to her car, sitting at a cafe, even inside what looked like her office. Someone had been following her, documenting her life, just like they had started doing with me. I stared at the pictures, my pulse hammering. Whoever was behind this hadn't just been watching me. They had been watching Emily for a long time, and now, for some reason, they had started focusing on me too. I grabbed the box and rushed out of the bedroom, my only thought being to get out of that house. I called Emily again as I locked the front door behind me, my voice shaking. "Emily, you need to come home. Right now. This isn't just about me, someone's been watching you too." She was silent for a moment, then whispered, "I think I know who it is." My breath caught. Who? Who? She hesitated before answering. "There's this guy, I dated him a while back. He got really weird toward the end, showing up places uninvited, asking me where I was all the time. I thought he was just clingy, but then I found a camera hidden in my living room. I changed the locks, but I never told anyone. I thought it was over." My skin crawled. "Emily, this isn't over. He's still watching you. And now he's watching me too." We called the police that night. They took the photographs as evidence, but I could tell they weren't sure what to do about it. There was no direct proof linking Emily's ex to the pictures, no way to confirm who had been inside the house. But Emily and I knew. We could feel it. Story 2. The hotel room was quiet except for the low hum of the air conditioning. I had arrived late, exhausted from my long drive, and collapsed into bed without even bothering to turn on the television. The sheets were stiff, the pillows too firm, but I was too tired to care. Sleep came quickly, pulling me into a deep, dreamless state. The shrill ring of the room phone jolted me awake. My heart pounded as I reached for it, squinting at the glowing red numbers on the clock. It was exactly 2 a.m. The room was still, the kind of stillness that felt unnatural, like something was waiting just beyond the edges of my perception. I hesitated before answering, my fingers cold against the receiver. I brought the phone to my ear, my voice hoarse with sleep. "Hello." For a moment there was nothing, just silence, thick and heavy. Then, a whisper, barely audible, slid through the line. The voice spoke my name, stretching it out in a slow, deliberate drawl. A chill ran down my spine, every hair on my arm standing on end. I swallowed hard, trying to find my voice. "Who is this?" No response. Just breathing, soft and steady, like someone was close enough to feel my presence through the line. Then, just as I was about to hang up, the voice spoke again, lower this time. "Check under the bed." The line clicked, the silence that followed even more suffocating than the whisper itself. My body locked up, my mind racing through every possible explanation. A prank? A mistake? My pulse thundered in my ears as I turned my head toward the bed. The room felt darker now, the corners more shadowed, the air thick with something unspoken. I forced myself to move, throwing the blankets aside and swinging my legs over the edge. The floor was cool beneath my feet as I knelt down. I hesitated, my breath catching as I lifted the bed skirt. The dim light from the bedside lamp barely reached the space beneath, casting eerie shapes across the carpet. My fingers trembled as I reached underneath, feeling for something, anything. And then I touched it. A small hard object stuck to the bed frame with what felt like tape. My stomach twisted as I pulled it free, the tiny device fitting snugly in my palm. It was a camera, barely the size of a quarter, its tiny lens gleaming under the dim light. My breath hitched as I turned it over in my hands, my mind spinning with questions I didn't want answered. How long had it been there? Who had put it there? And worse, had it been recording me? My skin crawled at the thought, a deep sense of violation washing over me. I stood quickly, my fingers gripping the camera so tightly my knuckles ached. My eyes darted around the room, scanning every surface, every shadow, every piece of furniture. I suddenly felt exposed, as if unseen eyes were still on me. I moved to the door, my heart racing as I checked the lock. It was still secure, the deadbolt in place. But that didn't ease the panic clawing at my chest. Someone had been in here. Someone had planted that camera. My mind replayed every moment since I had checked in. Had I seen anything strange? Had anyone been watching me? My hands shook as I reached for my phone. I debated calling the front desk but hesitated. What would I even say? Would they take me seriously? The thought of someone brushing it off as a misunderstanding made my stomach churn. I looked at the tiny camera again, my fingers pressing against the smooth plastic. There was no misunderstanding this. I needed to get out of this room. The walls felt like they were closing in, the silence pressing down on me like a weight. I grabbed my bag, stuffing my belongings inside with frantic movements. My keys, my wallet, my shoes, everything needed to be with me. I wasn't staying here a second longer. As I reached for the door handle, my phone buzzed in my hand. My heart nearly stopped as I looked at the screen. An unknown number. My fingers hovered over the answer button, hesitation freezing me in place. The ringing stopped after a few seconds, only to start again almost immediately. I couldn't bring myself to answer. I let it ring until it finally stopped. A message popped up on my screen. I stared at it, my blood running cold. "Why are you leaving?" My breath came in short gasps, my fingers tightening around my phone. I turned toward the window, half expecting to see someone standing outside, watching me. But there was nothing, just the quiet, empty parking lot below. Panic surged through me. This wasn't just a coincidence. Whoever had put that camera under my bed was watching me right now. They knew I had found it. They knew I was trying to leave. My mind raced with possibilities, each one worse than the last. I needed to move fast. I grabbed my bag and yanked the door open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. It was eerily silent, the kind of silence that felt unnatural, like something was lurking just out of sight. I kept my head down as I walked, my footsteps too loud against the carpeted floor. The elevator was at the far end of the hallway, its silver doors gleaming under the fluorescent lights. I pressed the button, my fingers drumming anxiously against my bag. The doors opened with a quiet chime and I stepped inside, pressing the lobby button over and over as if that would make it move faster. As the doors began to close, I caught a glimpse of something at the end of the hallway. A figure, standing just around the corner, barely visible in the dim light. My stomach dropped as I realized they weren't moving. They were just standing there, watching. The doors shut before I could make out any details. but the image was burned into my mind. The ride down felt endless. I gripped my phone, my thumb hovering over the emergency call button. I didn't know who to call: the police, the hotel staff, anyone who could help. The moment the doors slid open, I bolted toward the front desk, my breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. The night manager looked up, startled by my frantic approach. I forced myself to speak, my voice unsteady. Someone was watching me. There was a camera in my room. The words felt surreal leaving my mouth, like they belonged to someone else's nightmare. His face paled, and he immediately picked up the phone. "Which room?" he asked, already dialing. I barely managed to get the number out before he was calling security. My hand shook as I set the small camera on the counter, watching as he eyed it with unease. Story 3. The gas station was nearly empty when I pulled in. It was late, and the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow over the parking lot. I had been driving for hours and needed a break, so I decided to use the restroom before getting back on the road. The convenience store was quiet, the cashier barely acknowledging me as I walked past the shelves and into the dimly lit hallway leading to the bathrooms. The restroom door creaked as I pushed it open. The smell of cheap cleaning supplies filled the air, masking something musty underneath. The tiled floor was slightly damp, and a single light flickered near the sinks. I moved quickly to one of the stalls, locking it behind me. The place was empty, or so I thought. As I sat there, I heard the door open again. Footsteps echoed against the tiles, slow and deliberate. I didn't think much of it at first. It was a public restroom after all. But something about the way they moved, too controlled, too careful, made my skin prickle. I glanced down at the floor, at the narrow space between the stall door and the ground. That's when I saw them. A pair of shoes, just a few feet away, partially obscured by the stall next to mine. At first I thought nothing of it. Someone else had come in. No big deal. But then I noticed something strange. The shoes weren't moving. They weren't shifting weight, weren't stepping forward or back. They were just there. A chill ran down my spine. I cleared my throat and called out, trying to sound casual. "Hey, someone in there." My voice echoed in the empty space, swallowed by the silence that followed. No response. The air felt thick, heavy in my lungs. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the person was just standing still, checking their phone, or lost in thought. But something wasn't right. My breathing grew shallow as I forced myself to glance down again. The shoes had changed position. They had turned. Now they were facing my stall. Every muscle in my body tensed. My hands clenched into fists as a wave of dread crashed over me. Whoever was out there wasn't just standing still, they were watching, listening, waiting. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my voice. "Hello?" I said again, a little louder this time. No answer. I could hear my own heartbeat now, thudding in my ears. My skin prickled with the undeniable sensation of being trapped. My mind raced through my options. I could wait, hope they left, pretend I wasn't scared. Or I could make a move, force this situation to end on my terms. Slowly, I reached for the lock, my fingers trembling against the metal. Just as I was about to unlock the door, the shoes shifted again. A slow, deliberate step closer to my stall. The tiny gap at the bottom of the door darkened as they neared. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. I couldn't see their face. I couldn't even see their legs, just the shoes' old, dirty sneakers, the kind that looked worn down from miles of walking. The silence stretched between us, suffocating. Then, without warning, the shoes slid forward another inch. Panic clawed at my chest. I yanked my phone from my pocket, my fingers fumbling as I tried to turn it on. No signal. Of course. The gas station was in the middle of nowhere. I cursed under my breath, gripping the phone like a lifeline. I tried to listen for any other sounds. Breathing, movement, anything that would give me a clue about who was out there. But there was nothing. Just the stillness of the restroom and the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. My legs felt weak, my throat dry. I couldn't stay in there forever. I had to get out. Taking a deep breath, I braced myself and made a decision. I stomped my foot against the floor, hard, trying to startle whoever was on the other side. "Hey," I shouted, forcing my voice to be stronger than I felt. "If you're messing around, it's not funny." The shoes didn't move, didn't flinch. They just stayed there, motionless, as if they were rooted to the ground. My stomach twisted into knots. This wasn't normal. No one stood that still for this long. No one ignored someone calling out to them like that. I clenched my jaw and prepared to act. I would throw the door open, shove my way out, run if I had to. I reached for the lock, my pulse hammering in my ears. Just as I slid it back, the shoes moved. Not away, not toward me. But slowly, deliberately, they turned to the side. It was such a small movement, but it was enough to send a fresh wave of terror through me. The way they turned it felt intentional, as if they were letting me know they were aware of me, that they were choosing to stay. I didn't wait any longer. I shoved the door open with all my strength, stepping out before I could hesitate. My eyes darted to the stall next to mine, expecting to see someone standing there, but it was empty. The door was wide open, the stall completely vacant. The shoes were gone. A shiver crawled up my spine. I turned in circles, searching the small restroom for any sign of someone else, but I was alone. I hurried to the sink, splashing cold water on my face, trying to calm the shaking in my hands. This didn't make sense. I had seen the shoes. I had watched them move. Forcing myself to breathe, I turned toward the exit, eager to leave. My hand was on the door when I heard it. A single, slow creak from behind me. I whipped around, my part in my throat. One of the stall doors, the one that had been wide open, was now slightly ajar, swinging just enough to make a sound. I didn't stay to find out more. I yanked the restroom door open and ran, my pulse hammering as I burst into the gas station store. The cashier barely looked up as I hurried past him, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The parking lot felt too open, too exposed, but I forced myself to keep moving. Story 4. It was nearly midnight when I pulled into the gas station, the fluorescent lights casting an eerie glow over the empty lot. The place was quiet, except for the occasional hum of a passing car on the highway. I had been driving for hours and needed to refuel before continuing my trip. The air was crisp, and the only sound was the rhythmic beeping of the pump as I inserted my card. As I stood by my car, waiting for the tank to fill, I noticed a man lingering near the convenience store entrance. He was tall and thin, dressed in a faded hoodie and jeans, shifting from foot to foot as if debating whether to approach. Something about him felt off, but I tried to ignore it. I kept my eyes on the pump, hoping he would stay where he was. Moments later, I heard footsteps approaching. My pulse quickened as I turned my head slightly, pretending not to notice. The man stopped a few feet away, clearing his throat before speaking. "Hey there, need a windshield cleaning." "Only a couple of bucks," he said, holding up a dirty rag. His voice was rough, like someone who had smoked one too many cigarettes. I forced a polite smile and shook my head. "No thanks, I'm good," I said, keeping my tone firm but calm. He didn't move, just stood there staring at me for a moment longer than necessary. The unease in my stomach grew, and I gripped the gas pump tighter. The man nodded slowly, but instead of walking away, he stepped closer. "Come on, it'll only take a minute," he pressed, his tone changing slightly. There was something unsettling about his persistence, and I felt my grip on my keys tighten. I shook my head again, this time taking a step back toward my driver's side door. I said, "No, man. I appreciate it, but I don't need it." His face darkened. His jaw tensed as he exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. "Ain't gotta be rude," he muttered, glancing around the empty lot. A chill ran down my spine as I realized just how alone I was. The gas station was empty, the store clerk inside barely visible behind the counter. If something happened, no one would hear me. I tried to ignore the pounding in my chest as I carefully removed the nozzle from my car. I moved swiftly, reaching for the door handle. But before I could slip inside, he lunged toward the passenger side. My breath caught in my throat as I saw his hand grip the door handle, yanking at it violently. Panic surged through me. My fingers fumbled as I scrambled to press the lock button. The sound of the doors locking echoed inside the car just as he pulled the handle again. Harder this time. His expression twisted into one of frustration and anger, his other hand slamming against the window. "Open the door," he barked, his voice sharp and demanding. My heart pounded as I shoved the key into the ignition with trembling hands. I barely registered my own breath as I threw the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. The man stepped back, raising his hands like he was caught off guard by my reaction. His expression changed from anger to something else, something that looked almost amused, as if he had been testing me, seeing how far he could push before I panicked. I didn't stick around to figure out what his next move would be. I hit the gas, speeding out of the lot and onto the dark, empty road. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I couldn't shake the image of him trying to yank open my door, the way his expression shifted from fake friendliness to hostility in an instant. My mind raced as I replayed the encounter over and over. Had he been waiting for someone like me? Someone alone, distracted, vulnerable? The thought made my stomach churn. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see his figure running after me, but the road behind me remained empty. I finally pulled over a few miles down the highway, my hands shaking as I caught my breath. My heart was still racing, and I could feel the lingering fear in my chest. I knew I should report it, but what could I say? Some guy at a gas station tried to get into my car. Would the police even take it seriously? I debated for a few minutes before finally picking up my phone. My fingers hesitated over the dial pad, but then I pressed the numbers. When the dispatcher answered, I took a deep breath. "Hi, I just had a really weird encounter at a gas station. A man tried to get into my car," I said, my voice still unsteady. The dispatcher asked for details, and I relayed everything I could remember: the man's height, his clothes, the way he had tried to act friendly before turning aggressive. "Are you in a safe location now?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Yeah, I pulled over on the highway. I don't think he followed me." She told me she'd send an officer to check the area and asked if I wanted to meet them in person, but I declined. I just wanted to get home. She advised me to stay alert and report anything else unusual. Before hanging up, she said, "You did the right thing by locking your doors and getting out of there." I drove home with my hands still tight on the wheel, my mind replaying the encounter over and over. When I finally reached my driveway, I hesitated before getting out of the car. The fear was still there, lingering in the back of my mind. I locked my doors the second I stepped inside and double-checked every window. That night, I barely slept. Every sound made me jump, every creak of the house sending my heart racing. I knew I was safe, But the what ifs haunted me. What if I had been slower? What if I hadn't locked the doors in time? What if he had been waiting for someone exactly like me? The next day, I called the gas station to see if they had security cameras. The clerk on duty confirmed that they did, but when I asked if they had footage of the man, he sighed. "Sorry, our cameras don't catch much outside the pumps. It's mostly for inside the store." My stomach dropped. There would be no record of what happened, no proof of the man who had tried to get into my car. For weeks, I found myself glancing over my shoulder every time I got gas. I never stopped at stations late at night again. Every time I saw someone lingering near the pumps, my chest tightened and I made sure my doors were locked. The encounter had been brief, but it had left a mark. I never saw the man again, but his face stayed with me. The way he had smiled at first, the shift in his expression when I rejected his offer, the anger when he realized I wasn't going to make it easy for him. It was a reminder that danger doesn't always come with a warning. It can start as something as simple as an offer to clean your windshield. Story 5. Walking through the mall parking garage that night, I was focused on my phone, scrolling through messages as I made my way toward my car. The overhead lights flickered slightly, casting long shadows against the concrete. The lot wasn't completely empty, but the few cars that remained were spaced out, their owners likely inside the mall finishing up last-minute shopping. My footsteps echoed in the quiet, and I found myself walking a little faster, eager to get inside my car and head home. As I got closer, I noticed a van parked unusually close to my driver's side door. It hadn't been there when I arrived, and something about its positioning made me uneasy. The windows were tinted dark, and I couldn't see inside, but I felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. I slowed my pace, my heart beginning to pick up, a creeping sense of unease washing over me. There was plenty of open space in the lot. There was no reason for a vehicle to be parked so close, unless it was intentional. Just as I was a few feet away, the back door of the van slid open slightly. It was a small movement, barely noticeable, but it sent a spike of adrenaline through me. I caught the briefest glimpse of a dark figure inside, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to run. Without hesitation, I turned sharply on my heel and sprinted in the opposite direction, my heart slamming against my ribs. My breath came in short gasps as I fought the urge to look over my shoulder, knowing that wasting even a second could be a mistake. I heard movement behind me, the unmistakable sound of the van's door sliding open further. Panic surged through me as I ran, my mind racing with thoughts of what might have happened if I had gotten any closer. My car keys were still clutched in my hand, but there was no way I was going to risk trying to unlock my car with someone that close. I spotted the entrance to the mall in the distance, its bright lights spilling onto the pavement, and I focused on reaching it as fast as I could. The pounding of my footsteps echoed in my ears as I burst through the doors, nearly colliding with a group of shoppers on their way out. My chest heaved as I turned to look back, scanning the garage through the glass doors. The van was still there, its back door now closed, but I could see the faint outline of someone sitting in the driver's seat. The person didn't move, didn't make any attempt to follow me inside, but I knew they had been waiting for me. I forced myself to take slow breaths, trying to steady the shaking in my hands. A security guard stood near the entrance, chatting with an employee from one of the stores, and I made my way over to them. My voice wavered as I explained what had happened, my mind still spinning from the close call. The guard's expression darkened as he listened, nodding as he reached for his radio. He assured me he would check it out and asked me to stay inside while he walked toward the garage. Minutes stretched out as I stood near the entrance, keeping my eyes locked on the van. Other shoppers passed by, unaware of the unease twisting in my stomach. I kept expecting the van to speed off, but it remained still, its engine silent, as if whoever was inside was waiting for something. My grip on my keys tightened, my body still tense despite the relative safety of the mall. The security guard returned a few minutes later, his expression unreadable. He told me the van had pulled away the moment he approached, disappearing down the ramp before he could get a good look at the driver. There were no plates visible on the back, making it difficult to report. His tone was serious as he advised me not to walk to my car alone and suggested calling someone to pick me up. I nodded, the reality of the situation settling in my chest like a weight. The thought of returning to my car, of walking through that lot again, sent a fresh wave of fear through me. I called a friend who lived nearby, my fingers trembling as I typed out the message. While I waited, the security guard stood nearby, his presence reassuring but not enough to shake the feeling of dread lingering in my gut. When my friend arrived, I hesitated before stepping outside again, scanning the lot for any sign of the van. The garage seemed normal now, just a quiet, empty structure filled with parked cars and fluorescent lights. But I knew better. Something had been waiting for me, something that had nearly succeeded in whatever it had planned. The thought made my skin crawl. With the guard watching, I hurried to my car, unlocking it with shaking hands before quickly climbing inside and locking the doors. My friend followed behind in their car, making sure I left safely. As I pulled onto the main road, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see the van lurking behind me. The paranoia clung to me, even when I reached home and locked the door behind me. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every small sound made me jump. Every shadow outside my window sent my heart racing. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the van, the door sliding open, the dark figure inside. If I had ignored my gut feeling and gotten any closer, I wasn't sure if I would have made it out unscathed. The what-ifs haunted me, lingering in the back of my mind like a warning. The next day, I reported the incident to the police, but without a plate number or clear description, there wasn't much they could do. They advised me to be cautious, to always be aware of my surroundings, and to trust my instincts. Their words stayed with me, reinforcing what I already knew: something dangerous had been in that parking garage, and it had been waiting for someone like me. For weeks, I avoided that mall, unwilling to step foot in the parking garage again. When I finally did return, I parked as close to the entrance as possible, making sure I was never alone when walking to my car. The fear never fully went away, but I learned to trust that uneasy feeling, the one that had saved me that night. Looking back, I realized how close I had come to something truly terrifying. If I had hesitated even a second longer, if I had ignored the feeling of wrongness in my gut, I might not have made it home. The thought stayed with me, a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always come with a warning. It often lurks in plain sight, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Story 6. I pushed open my apartment door and stepped inside, expecting the usual stillness that greeted me after a long day. The air felt different, colder than it should have been. I set my bag down and flicked on the light, my eyes scanning the room for anything unusual. That was when I noticed that my bedroom window was open. I froze in place, my heart beginning to pound in my chest. I lived on the 4th floor. There was no fire escape, no ledge wide enough to climb. My stomach twisted as I stepped closer, a creeping sense of unease settling over me. The curtains fluttered slightly from the wind, and as I reached the window, I saw them dirty footprints smudged across the windowsill inside. I swallowed hard, my breath catching in my throat. The prints were distinct, like someone had climbed in from the outside. My fingers trembled as I touched the sill, feeling the grit of dirt and dust beneath my fingertips. It was fresh. Someone had been here, inside my home. The realization sent a chill down my spine. I turned sharply, scanning the room, half expecting someone to still be there. But everything seemed normal. My bed was untouched, my dresser drawers closed, nothing appeared out of place. And yet, the open window and the footprints told a different story. I backed out of the room, my skin prickling with unease. Had someone broken in? If so, were they still here? I grabbed the heaviest object I could find, a metal flashlight from the kitchen counter, and moved cautiously through the apartment. My hands felt clammy as I checked the living room, the bathroom, the closet. Everything was as I had left it. There were no signs of forced entry on the front door, no other windows open. It didn't make sense. I walked back to the bedroom, keeping my back against the wall as I surveyed the space again. The thought of someone scaling 4 stories to get inside was impossible, wasn't it? I peered out the window, looking down into the alley below. The pavement was far, too far for someone to climb up easily, and yet someone had managed it. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped back. My apartment no longer felt safe. The idea of someone watching me, of someone knowing how to get inside, made my skin crawl. I grabbed my phone, my fingers unsteady as I dialed. The police dispatcher answered, and I quickly explained the situation, my voice shaking. The officer on the other end asked if anything was stolen. I glanced around again, trying to take inventory of my things. Nothing seemed missing, nothing seemed disturbed. That was almost worse. If they hadn't taken anything, why had they come inside? The dispatcher told me to stay put while they sent someone over. I nodded, even though no one could see me. I stood near the door, gripping the flashlight tightly as I listened for any sound, any hint that I wasn't alone. The apartment was silent, but the open window gnawed at my mind. I could feel my pulse hammering in my ears, my breath shallow. Minutes passed, dragging out like hours. Then, a knock at the door made me jump. The officer stepped inside, taking in my pale face and tense stance. He listened as I explained, his brow furrowing as he followed me into the bedroom. He examined the footprints, pressing his fingers against the dirty marks. His expression darkened, and that only made the knot in my stomach tighten. He checked the window, looking out just as I had. Then, he turned to me. "There's no way someone could climb up here without equipment," he said. "And even if they did, why would they leave the window open?" His words made my chest tighten. That was the part one couldn't understand. It felt deliberate, like someone had wanted me to notice. The officer looked around the apartment, checking for any other signs of a break-in. He asked me if I had any enemies, anyone who might be trying to scare me. I shook my head, feeling helpless. I wasn't important enough for anyone to go through this kind of effort, and yet someone had. He took pictures of the footprints, making notes in his report. Then he turned back to me. "If nothing was stolen, and there's no sign of a struggle, it might have been a prank," he said, though he didn't sound convinced. "Still, I'd recommend being extra cautious. Lock your windows, check your doors, maybe consider installing cameras." The thought of setting up security measures in my own home made me feel sick. My apartment had always been my safe space. Now it felt like a target. I nodded numbly, watching as the officer finished his report. He assured me they'd patrol the area more frequently, but I could tell he didn't have any real answers. After he left, I locked the door, double-checking it 3 times. Then I walked back to the bedroom, staring at the open window. My reflection stared back at me in the dark glass, and for a moment I felt like I wasn't alone. I slammed the window shut, locking it firmly before stepping away. That night I lay in bed, unable to sleep. Every creak, every distant sound made my skin prickle. I kept picturing someone standing in the room while I was gone, moving through my space, touching my things. The footprints were proof they had been there. But the real question was, had they been there before? Had they come inside other nights while I was sleeping? I stayed awake until the sun started to rise, exhaustion pressing down on me like a weight. But even in the daylight, the unease didn't fade. The window was still there, the footprints still lingering in my mind. I didn't know who would come into my apartment, and I didn't know if they'd be back. But I did know one thing. I wasn't safe anymore. Story 7. The open house had been on my list for weeks. I wasn't in a rush to buy, but I liked to look at places, imagining what life might be like in a new home. This one was an older 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind with wide front porches and tree-lined streets. It had good bones, and the photos online made it look charming, so I decided to stop by. The front door was propped open when I arrived, a small sign welcoming visitors inside. A few other people milled about, chatting in hushed tones as they moved from room to room. A tall man in a navy suit stood by the entryway, smiling warmly as I stepped inside. "Welcome," he said, his voice smooth and professional. "I'm the listing agent. Let me know if you have any questions." I nodded, offering a polite smile before stepping past him. The house smelled of fresh paint and floor polish, the scent of recent renovations. I wandered into the living room, admiring the high ceilings and large windows. A man in a gray sweater stood near the fireplace, running his hand along the mantel. He turned slightly as I walked by, nodding in acknowledgement. "Great craftsmanship," he murmured, as if talking to himself. I didn't think much of it at first. It was normal for potential buyers to comment on the home, and he seemed genuinely interested. I continued through to the kitchen, where another man, dressed in a button-up shirt with rolled-up sleeves, was checking under the sink. He glanced up as I entered, flashing a quick smile. "Just making sure everything's in working order," he said. Something about the way he said it made me pause. He didn't have the air of a casual visitor, or even a potential buyer. He seemed too focused, too deliberate. I watched him for a moment before continuing on, pushing away the nagging feeling in the back of my mind. Upstairs, I explored the bedrooms, noting the creak in the floorboards as I moved. One of the rooms had a large bay window that overlooked the street. As I stepped inside, I caught sight of a man standing near the closet, flipping through a folder of paperwork. He looked up at me, offering another quick smile. Inspecting some details, he said casually before closing the folder. It was then that my stomach twisted. The voice was the same as the man downstairs in the kitchen. I studied his face, feeling my breath hitch. The haircut, the posture, everything was identical to the supposed handyman. But now he wore glasses, as if trying to change his appearance slightly. I turned sharply and left the room, my pulse quickening. As I moved down the hallway, I tried to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? Maybe they were just similar-looking men. But the way he had looked at me, the way he had spoken, it was too familiar. I descended the stairs quickly, scanning the rooms below. The man in the gray sweater from earlier was now standing by the front door, his hands in his pockets. As I walked past, he glanced at me again, his expression unreadable. I could feel his eyes lingering as I stepped back into the kitchen. The so-called handyman was gone. My heart pounded as I walked toward the sink, glancing around for any sign of him. The house was still filled with people, but no one else seemed to notice anything strange. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was a coincidence. Then I saw him again, this time in the backyard, near the edge of the property. He was standing by the fence, looking down at something in his hands. He no longer wore the glasses. My chest tightened. I had seen enough. I turned on my heel and walked straight for the front door, pushing past the small crowd still lingering in the living room. The man in the navy suit, the supposed listing agent, was speaking to someone, his back turned to me. As I stepped onto the porch, I risked one last glance over my shoulder. The man was gone. I hurried to my car, fumbling with my keys. My hands were shaking as I slid into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My breathing was uneven, my mind racing. Who was he? Why had he changed his identity in every room? Was he following me, or was there something else going on? I pulled out of the driveway, my heart still pounding as I glanced in the rearview mirror. The house stood silent, its windows dark despite the bright afternoon sun. I tried to convince myself that I had imagined it, that there had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew better. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I lay awake, replaying the afternoon in my mind. Every detail felt deliberate, the way he had positioned himself in different rooms, the way he had subtly changed his appearance. I knew what I had seen. A few days later, curiosity got the best of me. I searched for the listing online, wondering if there were any updates on the house. But to my surprise, the post had been taken down. The house was no longer on the market. I dug deeper, searching for any information on the property. That's when I found an old news article buried in a local archive. The house had been empty for years, abandoned after the previous owner disappeared under mysterious circumstances. There had never been an official listing. My blood ran cold. If there was no open house, no official sale, then who had invited people in? And more importantly, who had that man been? I slammed my laptop shut, my hands clammy against the keyboard. I didn't want to know the answer. I didn't want to think about who or what I had seen in that house. All I knew was that I had been watched, and I wasn't supposed to notice. Story 8. The diner was always quiet this late at night, with only the occasional trucker or night owl stopping by. The hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of a passing car were the only things breaking the silence. I wiped down the counter, glancing at the clock above the register. Another 2 hours before my shift ended, and I was already exhausted. Outside, the parking lot was nearly empty, just a single car parked near the streetlight. The dim glow barely reached the edge of the lot, leaving most of the area in shadow. I poured myself a cup of coffee, the warmth a small comfort against the cold that crept in through the old diner's windows. It was just another slow night, the kind where time seemed to drag endlessly. Then I saw him. A man stood just outside the large front window, motionless, staring in. He wasn't near the door or walking past, he was simply standing there, his gaze locked on me. My hand tightened around the coffee mug, a shiver running down my spine. Something about the way he stood, so still and deliberate, made my skin crawl. I set the mug down and took a slow step closer to the window. The fluorescent lights inside cast a faint reflection, but I could still make out his face, or rather, the lack of detail in it. His features were blurred by the darkness, but his posture remained rigid, like he had been standing there for a long time. My heartbeat picked up, an uneasy feeling creeping into my stomach. I hesitated before moving around the counter, my shoes making soft sounds against the tiled floor. The man didn't move, didn't shift, didn't react in any way. It was as if he was waiting. I reached the door and hesitated for just a second before pushing it open. A cold gust of air rushed in, but when I stepped outside, the man was gone. I turned my head in both directions, scanning the lot and the street beyond. There was nothing, no footsteps, no sign of movement. The only sound was the faint rustling of the wind against the trees. It was impossible. He had been standing there only seconds ago. There was nowhere he could have gone that quickly. Then I saw it. A handprint on the glass, pressed firmly against the window where he had been standing. The shape was perfect, as if his hand had just been there. The print looked fresh, the condensation from the night air making it stand out against the glass. My stomach twisted as I stared at it, my breath coming out in slow, uneven puffs. I reached out hesitantly, my fingertips barely brushing the print. It was cold, as if the touch had drained the warmth from the glass itself. A deep unease settled over me. I had seen him. I knew he was real. But where had he gone? And why had he been staring at me like that? I stepped back inside, locking the door behind me even though I knew it wouldn't do much if he came back. My hands felt clammy as I wiped them on my apron, trying to shake off the lingering discomfort. The diner felt different now. The quiet more oppressive, the fluorescent lights too harsh. I forced myself to take a deep breath, telling myself it was nothing, just some guy messing around. The rest of my shift crawled by and I couldn't stop glancing at the window. The handprint faded over time, but I still saw its outline every time I looked. I expected the man to return, to step out from the darkness and press his face against the glass. But he never did. By the time my shift ended, I was eager to leave. I grabbed my bag and headed out to my car, my keys clutched tightly in my hand. The lot was still empty, the street eerily quiet. I glanced at the window one last time before getting in my car. The handprint was completely gone now, like it had never been there at all. The drive home was uneventful, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow on the road felt too dark. Every flicker of movement in my peripheral vision made my heart jump. I locked my doors the moment I got inside my apartment, double-checking them even though I knew I was being paranoid. I barely slept that night, tossing and turning as my mind replayed the moment over and over. The man's stillness, the way he had just disappeared. I told myself it didn't matter, that it was over. But deep down, I wasn't sure if I believed that. The next night, I was back at the diner. I told myself I wouldn't look, that I wouldn't let my nerves get to me. But as the hours passed, I found my gaze drifting toward the window. The parking lot was empty, nothing out of place. Then, around the same time as the night before, I saw him again, standing in the exact same spot, watching. My breath caught in my throat, my fingers tightening around the rag I had been using to wipe the counter. He hadn't moved an inch. I swallowed hard, my mind racing. I didn't want to go outside again, didn't want to see that handprint on the glass. But I couldn't ignore him. Slowly, I walked toward the window, my heart hammering with each step. He didn't move, didn't blink. His presence felt heavier this time, like the air itself had thickened around him. My hands shook as I reached the door. I took a deep breath and pushed it open. Nothing. The lot was empty again. The wind blew softly through the trees, but there was no sign of him. I turned back to the window, dreading what I already knew would be there. The handprint. This time it was larger, more defined, as if he had pressed his palm harder against the glass. My chest tightened, a cold dread settling deep in my bones. I didn't understand what was happening, but I knew one thing for certain. He would be back. Story 9. The office building was nearly empty by the time I stepped into the elevator. I had stayed late to finish some reports, and by the time I left, only a handful of people were still around. The air inside the elevator was cool, the faint hum of the machinery filling the silence. I pressed the button for the lobby and leaned against the back wall, exhausted from the long day. The doors slid shut, and the elevator began its slow descent. I watched the numbers above the door count down, my mind drifting as I thought about getting home. Just as the elevator passed the 10th floor, It suddenly jerked to a stop. The lights flickered, then steadied again, casting long shadows against the metallic walls. My stomach twisted with unease. I reached for the emergency button, pressing it firmly, but there was no response. The silence in the small space suddenly felt suffocating. I pulled out my phone, but as expected, there was no signal. Letting out a frustrated sigh, I glanced up at the ceiling, wondering how long I would be stuck there. That's when I saw it. The hatch in the ceiling was slightly ajar, something I hadn't noticed when I stepped in. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the dark gap. Then, slowly, something moved. A hand, pale and thin, gripped the edge of the opening. My body tensed, every muscle locking into place. Before I could react, a man's face emerged from the darkness above. His eyes, dark and unblinking, locked onto mine as he pulled himself through the opening. He moved slowly, deliberately, as if he had all the time in the world. My breath hitched as his entire body lowered into the elevator, his feet barely making a sound as they touched the floor. I took a step back, my heart hammering against my ribs. He was tall, his clothes dark and slightly disheveled. There was something off about the way he stood, too still, too composed. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at me with an expression that sent ice crawling through my veins. "Who are you?" My voice came out unsteady, barely above a whisper. He didn't answer. He just stood there, his gaze never wavering, as if he was waiting for something. I swallowed hard, my hand inching toward the emergency button again. Before I could press it, he took a step forward. I pressed myself against the wall, my body rigid with fear. The elevator was too small, nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had he gotten up there? Had he been in the elevator before me, hiding, or had he climbed in from another floor? Seconds felt like hours as we stood in that unbearable silence. He tilted his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, without warning, he reached into his pocket. I flinched, expecting a weapon, but he only pulled out something small and metallic. A key. He turned it over in his fingers, as if examining it, then slowly looked back at me. The air felt thick, heavy with something I couldn't name. The elevator remained still, the doors refusing to open, trapping me with him. I wanted to scream, to pound on the walls, but something about him kept me frozen in place. He exuded a quiet menace, an unnatural calm that made my skin crawl. Finally, a loud beep broke the silence. The elevator shuddered, and the numbers above the door flickered back to life. My stomach lurched as it resumed its descent, moving slower than before. The man didn't react, didn't acknowledge the change. He just kept watching me, his fingers still rolling the key between them. The tension in my chest was unbearable. I gripped my phone tightly, though I knew it was useless. I just needed the doors to open. I needed to get out. The moment stretched longer than it should have, the floor numbers ticking down at an agonizing pace. As the elevator neared the lobby, he finally moved. Without a word, he reached up and pulled himself back through the ceiling hatch. His movements were smooth, practiced, as if he had done this 100 times before. Within seconds, he was gone, disappearing into the shadows above. The doors slid open. The brightly lit lobby greeted me, the sight almost surreal after the suffocating darkness of the elevator. I stumbled forward, my legs unsteady as I stepped out, glancing over my shoulder. The elevator remained empty, the ceiling hatch slightly ajar, the only evidence that he had ever been there. I turned to the security desk, my breath coming in quick, uneven bursts. The guard, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, looked up from his monitor. "You okay?" he asked, noting my shaken expression. I hesitated, glancing back at the elevator. The idea of explaining what had just happened felt ridiculous. Who would believe me? Instead, I asked, "Has anyone been working on the elevators today?" The guard frowned, shaking his head. "No, not that I know of." "Why?" My stomach twisted. I wanted to tell him to demand he check the cameras, but a sickening feeling told me I wouldn't find any proof. I took one last look at the elevator, its doors now closed, silent. Whatever had just happened, I knew one thing for sure. That man hadn't gotten in through normal means. And somehow I had the horrible feeling this wouldn't be the last time I saw him. Story 10. The hike had started like any other. A simple plan to explore a lesser-known trail that wound through thick forest and up into the hills. The air was crisp, the scent of pine hanging heavy, and the only sounds were our footsteps and the distant calls of birds. My friend Daniel had found the trail online, buried deep in a forum discussing hidden hikes that few people knew about. The lack of official markings made it feel like an adventure, like we were discovering something that had been forgotten. We had been walking for about 2 hours when we stumbled upon the clearing. It wasn't a natural break in the trees, but something deliberately made. The grass flattened in places as if people had gathered there often. At the center of it stood dozens of empty chairs arranged in a perfect circle, all facing inward. They were mismatched, some wooden, some metal, some old and weathered, while others looked almost new. The sight of them made me stop in my tracks, a strange unease creeping over me. Daniel whistled, stepping closer to the arrangement. "Well, this is creepy," he said, circling the chairs as if trying to find some clue to explain their presence. I followed him hesitantly, glancing around the clearing, expecting to see someone emerge from the trees. But there was no one. The forest was completely silent, the usual rustling of leaves and distant animal sounds strangely absent. That was when I noticed the footprints. Fresh impressions in the dirt, some overlapping each other, as if a group of people had recently been here. My stomach twisted at the thought that we might not be alone, that someone could be watching us from the trees. Daniel crouched to get a better look, running his fingers over one of the prints. "These are fresh," he muttered, his voice quieter now. "Like really fresh." I swallowed hard, my eyes scanning the tree line again. The feeling of being watched was growing stronger, an almost tangible pressure against my back. The chairs, the footprints, the unnatural silence, it all felt wrong. "Maybe we should go," I suggested, shifting from foot to foot, suddenly eager to leave the clearing behind. Daniel stood, brushing off his hands. "Come on, don't you want to figure out what this is? It's like a secret meeting spot or something." He grinned, but even he seemed less sure now, his enthusiasm dampened by the eerie atmosphere. I didn't share his curiosity. Something about the arrangement of those chairs, so deliberate, so expectant, set off every instinct in my body. A breeze passed through the clearing, rustling the trees just enough to break the silence. And then, a sound, a creaking noise, faint but distinct. My eyes darted to the chairs, my breath catching in my throat. One of them had moved. Not by much, just an inch, but it had definitely shifted. Daniel must have seen it too, because he suddenly stopped smiling. We stared at the chairs, waiting. The wind had died again, leaving the clearing in an unnatural stillness. Then another sound, this time from behind us. A snap like a twig breaking underfoot. My body tensed, every nerve on high alert. I turned sharply, my heart hammering against my ribs, but there was nothing. Just the trees, dark and dense, stretching endlessly in every direction. "Okay," Daniel said, his voice lower now, more cautious. "Maybe we should go." He took a step back and I followed immediately, neither of us willing to turn our backs on the clearing just yet. The chairs remained perfectly still, their empty seats somehow more menacing now. The footprints around them seemed to mock us, evidence of people we couldn't see, people who might still be nearby. We moved quickly, retracing our steps back toward the trail. The moment we left the clearing, the normal sounds of the forest returned: the rustling leaves, distant chirping, the occasional crack of a branch. It was as if we had crossed some invisible barrier, stepping back into reality. I didn't mention it, but I could tell Daniel noticed too. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his usual confidence gone. Neither of us spoke for a while, the tension between us heavy. We kept walking, pushing forward, until finally we saw the break in the trees that signaled the end of the trail. Relief flooded me at the sight of our car, parked right where we had left it. We picked up the pace, practically jogging the last few steps. Just as we reached the car, Daniel stopped suddenly, his eyes locked on the windshield. "What the hell?" he whispered, his face pale. My stomach dropped as I followed his gaze. There, wedged under the windshield wiper, was a single chair. A small wooden one, old and splintered, like it had been plucked straight from the clearing. I backed away instinctively, my pulse pounding in my ears. "That wasn't there before," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Daniel didn't respond, just stood frozen, staring at the chair like it might move on its own. A thought occurred to me then, something I had been trying to ignore ever since we saw the footprints. Someone had been there, someone had been watching, and they wanted us to know. Story 11. It was past midnight when I finally booked my ride home. The city streets were mostly empty, the occasional headlights passing by in a blur. I had been out with friends, and after a long night, all I wanted was to get home and crawl into bed. The Uber arrived within minutes, a dark sedan with tinted windows. The driver barely acknowledged me as I slid into the back seat. Something about him felt off immediately. He was middle-aged, wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't greet me or confirm my name, just nodded when I asked. His phone was mounted on the dashboard, the map displaying my home address like usual. I told myself I was being paranoid, that I was just tired. The car pulled away from the curb, and I leaned back, scrolling through my phone. The ride was silent, except for the soft hum of the engine. I glanced up every now and then, watching the familiar streets blur past. We were following the correct route at first, the map reflecting the estimated time home. But then, without warning, I heard a soft beep. The screen flickered, and the destination changed. I leaned forward slightly, my stomach tightening. The new location was nowhere near my apartment. My heart started pounding as I tried to keep my voice calm. I think the address just changed. That's not where I'm going." The driver didn't respond. His hands gripped the wheel tightly, his eyes fixed on the road. A cold dread settled over me. The doors were locked. The sound of them clicking into place had been so subtle that I hadn't even noticed until now. I swallowed hard, forcing my voice to stay steady. "Hey, I think there's a mistake. Can you turn around?" Again, he said nothing. The air in the car felt suffocating, thick with something unspoken. I glanced at my phone, my fingers shaking as I opened my messages. I typed as fast as I could, sending my location to my friend. My heart pounded in my chest. The streets outside grew unfamiliar. We had veered off the main roads, now winding through dimly lit side streets. I clenched my fists, my mind racing through possible escape plans. The driver's face remained impassive, unreadable. The only sound in the car was my own breathing, growing shallower by the second. I reached for the door handle, trying to stay quiet, but it was useless. The child lock was on. Panic clawed at my throat as I tried to think. My friend responded instantly, asking if I was okay. I quickly typed, "No, call me." The phone started ringing and I put it on speaker, hoping the sound would make the driver nervous. "Hey," I said loudly, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, I'm almost home. I'll be there in 5 minutes." The driver's grip on the wheel tightened, but he said nothing. My friend was sharp enough to pick up on the tension in my voice. "Where are you?" she asked, her tone laced with concern. I swallowed. "Just passing Main Street now," I lied, hoping the driver would hear and think someone was expecting me. The car slowed as we approached a red light. I knew this was my chance. My pulse pounded in my ears as I made my decision in an instant. The second the car came to a stop, I reached for the lock, yanking it up manually. The door gave a small click. I didn't hesitate. I shoved it open and threw myself out of the car. I hit the pavement hard, my knees scraping against the rough asphalt. Horns blared as I stumbled to my feet, the rush of adrenaline drowning out everything else. The driver shouted something, but I didn't look back. I ran. I ran as fast as I could, weaving through traffic, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I spotted a gas station ahead and sprinted toward it, nearly collapsing inside. The cashier looked up in alarm as I slammed my hands on the counter. "Call the police," I gasped. Now, my friend was still on the phone, shouting my name. I barely managed to choke out, "I got away. I'm safe. Just call someone." The cashier grabbed the phone, his eyes wide. I turned and looked out the window, half expecting the car to be parked outside, waiting. But it was gone. The driver had sped off the moment I escaped. My hands shook as I tried to catch my breath, my heart still racing. The police arrived within minutes. I told them everything that changed in the destination, the locked doors, the way the driver never spoke. They took my statement, asking for details about the car and the driver's appearance. I did my best to recall everything, though my mind felt foggy with panic. They pulled up my ride history, tracking down the driver's information. The officer's expression darkened as he glanced at the screen. "This driver isn't registered with Uber," he said. "The car matches, but the account was deactivated weeks ago." My stomach dropped. That meant whoever had picked me up wasn't supposed to be driving at all. The realization made my skin crawl. I had willingly stepped into a car with someone who had no record, no accountability. He had used an old account, one that shouldn't have been active. My knees felt weak at the thought of what could have happened if I hadn't jumped out. The police assured me they would investigate, but I could tell from their tone that these things didn't always lead to answers. The driver had vanished into the night, leaving no real trace behind. I was lucky, so incredibly lucky, to have escaped. That night I didn't sleep. Every sound outside made me flinch. Every passing car sent a fresh wave of fear through me. The reality of it settled deep in my bones. If that stoplight hadn't been red, if I had hesitated even a second longer, I might not have made it out. I never took another rideshare alone after that. The thought of stepping into a stranger's car again made my skin crawl. From then on, I made sure to triple-check the license plate, the driver's face, everything. Because once you've been in a car that isn't taking you home, you realize just how easily you can disappear. Story 12. The gas station was nearly empty, the only sounds coming from the hum of the overhead lights and the occasional gust of wind rattling the metal signs. I had stopped for fuel on my way home, exhausted from the long drive and eager to get back on the road. The station was old, the pavement cracked, and the single attendant inside looked half asleep behind the counter. It was the kind of place that felt forgotten, tucked away on a stretch of highway that most people only used in passing. As I stood by my car, waiting for the tank to fill, I glanced around the lot out of habit. That's when I noticed him. A man stood by a rusted-out sedan, the trunk wide open, a gas nozzle inserted directly into it. At first I thought maybe he had a generator or some kind of container inside, but as I stared, I realized there was nothing but the hollow space of the trunk. He was pumping gasoline straight into it. My stomach tensed as an uneasy feeling crept over me. Something about it wasn't right. Maybe he was stealing gas. But if that were the case, why not fill a canister? The smell of fuel was thick in the air. The fumes so strong they made my eyes water. The man didn't seem to care. He stood motionless, one hand on the nozzle, his other resting on the edge of the trunk. I shifted, trying not to stare, but it was too late. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto mine. A cold, unreadable expression spread across his face. My chest tightened as an unspoken understanding passed between us. I had seen something I wasn't supposed to. He didn't look away. Instead, he let go of the pump and took a step back, his hand disappearing into the trunk for a moment before re-emerging. He was holding a crowbar. My pulse spiked as he started walking toward me, his movements deliberate, his grip tightening around the metal handle. My first instinct was to pretend I hadn't noticed him, to act like I was minding my own business. But my body betrayed me. I took an involuntary step back, my breath coming quicker. His pace didn't change. He kept his eyes on me, his face unreadable, the crowbar swinging slightly in his grip. I glanced around the lot, hoping someone else was nearby, but the place was practically deserted. The only other person was the attendant inside, and he was staring at a small TV screen, oblivious. My heart pounded as I debated my next move. I could get in my car and lock the doors, but my gas pump was still attached. If I panicked and drove off too soon, I could rip the hose out or damage my car. He was getting closer. 20 feet. 15. His grip on the crowbar was firm, his knuckles pale under the flickering station lights. My throat was dry as I forced myself to speak, my voice coming out hoarse. "Hey man, you good?" And no response, just the steady sound of his boots against the pavement. I took another step back, my hand reaching for my car door. He was 10 feet away now, close enough that I could see the deep lines on his face, the way his lips twitched slightly as if he were enjoying this. My fingers fumbled with the handle, my mind racing through possible escapes. If I could just get inside, I could lock the doors, maybe even drive off with the pump still attached. 5 feet. He raised the crowbar slightly, just enough for the light to catch the dull metal. My muscles tensed, adrenaline flooding my veins. I had to do something now. Without thinking, I yanked the pump nozzle from my car, gasoline splashing onto the pavement. I swung it toward him, the lingering fuel sloshing in an arc. He flinched, stepping back just enough for me to seize the moment. I threw the nozzle to the ground and dove into my car, my hands trembling as I slammed the door shut. He moved fast. The crowbar crashed against the window just as I hit the lock button, the impact sending a web of cracks through the glass. I gasped, throwing the car into reverse, my tires screeching against the pavement. My pulse was a drumbeat in my ears as I spun the wheel, trying to put distance between us. He didn't chase me. He just stood there, watching, the crowbar still clutched in his hand. I could see his chest rising and falling, his breathing slow and even, like this was just another normal night for him. My hands were shaking as I floored the gas, speeding toward the exit. As I passed the station's storefront, I saw the attendant finally looking up from his TV, his mouth slightly open as he watched me tear out of the lot. He didn't move, didn't step outside, didn't seem surprised. It was as if he had seen this kind of thing before. My mind raced as I sped down the highway, my knuckles wet against the steering wheel. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see the rusted sedan following me, but there was nothing. Just the empty road stretching ahead, the glow of the gas station fading behind me. I didn't stop driving for a long time. The fear lingered, sitting heavy in my chest, my skin still prickling with the sensation of being watched. I kept replaying the moment in my head, the gas in the trunk, the slow way he walked toward me, the look in his eyes. When I finally stopped at another gas station miles down the road, I stayed in my car for a long time before getting out. I scanned the lot, checking every car, every shadow, every person who passed. Only when I was sure no one was watching did I step out and refuel, my hand still unsteady as I worked the pump. I never found out what that man was doing or why he reacted the way he did. Maybe he had been planning something worse. Maybe I had interrupted something I wasn't meant to see. All I knew was that I was lucky to have gotten away. And from that night on, I never stopped at an empty gas station again. Story 13. The notification from my security camera woke me up. The soft chime from my phone wasn't unusual. I lived in a quiet neighborhood, but sometimes a stray cat or a passing car would trigger the motion sensor. Still, something felt different this time. Groggy, I reached for my phone and tapped the screen to check the feed. The footage was grainy in the low light, but I could see the figure clearly. A person stood at my front door, motionless. They weren't knocking or ringing the bell, just standing there, facing the door. My stomach tightened as I squinted at the screen, trying to make out any details. They weren't wearing a mask, but their features were hard to see in the dim porch light. Their posture was unnatural, shoulders slightly hunched, arms hanging limply at their sides. I checked the timestamp, 3:04 a.m. I had no idea how long they had been there before the camera caught them. I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. My house was dark, the only light coming from my phone screen. I listened carefully, but everything was silent. I tapped the app, switching to the live view. The person was still there, standing completely still. A chill ran down my spine. I considered calling the police, but what would I say? They weren't doing anything illegal, just standing there. But something about their presence, their stillness, sent a wave of unease through me. I turned up the volume on my phone, hoping to catch any sound. Nothing. No footsteps, no rustling of clothes, not even the sound of breathing, just eerie, absolute silence. I glanced at the time, 3:12 a.m. Nearly 10 minutes had passed, and they hadn't moved. My pulse quickened as I tried to think. Should I turn on the porch light? Speak through the camera's microphone? I swallowed hard and pressed the intercom button. My voice was shaky as I spoke. "How can I help you?" The figure didn't react. They didn't flinch, didn't turn their head. They just kept standing there. I could feel my own heartbeat pounding against my ribs. I checked the rest of my security cameras. The front yard was empty. No car parked on the street, no signs of movement. Whoever this was had walked up to my house alone in the dead of night. I switched back to the front door camera, anxiety twisting in my stomach. 3:18 a.m. They were still there. My hand hovered over the emergency call button, but something made me hesitate. What if they left before the police arrived? Would they even take me seriously? My mind raced through possibilities. Was it a prank? Someone casing my house? I turned my phone's brightness down and slid out of bed. Slowly, I crept toward the front window, careful not to make any noise. I peeked through the blinds, my breath catching in my throat. The porch light cast long shadows across the steps, but I could see them. They were even closer than the camera made it seem. Their back was slightly hunched, their head tilted forward as if listening for something. My fingers clenched around my phone. I forced myself to breathe, trying to stay calm. If they tried to break in, I'd call the police immediately. But for now, they were just standing there. 3:23 a.m. Almost 20 minutes. My stomach churned as I watched them, waiting for them to do something, anything. Finally, at 3:24, they moved. Not abruptly, not as if startled, but slowly, deliberately. They took a single step back, then another. They turned, walking down the porch steps without hurry. I held my breath, watching as they disappeared down the sidewalk. My camera followed them until they stepped beyond its range, vanishing into the dark street. I stayed frozen in place, staring at the empty porch. I rewound the footage, watching the entire 20 minutes again, hoping to catch some detail I'd missed. But there was nothing. No attempt to enter, no sign of hesitation, just silent, unsettling stillness. I saved the video, my fingers shaking. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. Every small noise made me jump. Every shadow felt like it was hiding something. As soon as the sun rose, I checked my front yard. There were no footprints, no sign that anyone had been there at all. But I knew what I had seen. I showed the footage to a coworker later that day. He frowned, rewinding and pausing at different moments. "Creepy as hell," he muttered. "You should call the cops, just in case." I nodded, but deep down I doubted they could do anything. That night, I locked every door and window, double-checking them before bed. My heart pounded as I turned off the lights, terrified of what I might see if I checked my phone again. I didn't sleep well, jolting awake at every little sound. When my alarm went off in the morning, I reached for my phone with trembling hands. No notifications, no movement detected. I sighed in relief, but it didn't last long. The fear lingered, gnawing at the edges of my thoughts. Days passed. I tried to convince myself it was a one-time thing. A drifter, a prankster, someone with no real intention of harm. But every night at 3 a.m., I found myself waking up, checking my phone, waiting for another alert. A week later, my security camera caught movement again. My stomach dropped as I opened the app. The footage loaded, and I felt my blood run cold. The same person, the same spot, standing silently at my front door. This time I didn't hesitate. I called the police, my voice shaking as I explained. "They're back," I whispered. "They just stand there. They don't do anything, but they're watching." The dispatcher told me to stay inside, that officers were on their way. I stayed by the window, watching the figure in the darkness. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching longer than the last. The figure didn't move, just like before. I held my breath as red and blue lights flashed down the street. The figure finally reacted. As soon as the police car pulled up, they turned and walked away, slipping into the shadows before the officers could reach them. My heart pounded as I ran to the door, unlocking it for the police. They searched the area, but it was useless. The person was gone. The officers took my statement, told me to call again if they came back. "Probably just some drifter," one of them said. "Trying to scare you." I nodded, but I didn't believe that. I barely slept that night. My mind kept replaying the footage, the way they stood there, waiting, watching. The way they left, as if they knew exactly when to disappear. As if they knew the police wouldn't find them. Weeks passed without another sighting. I should have felt relieved, but I didn't. Every night at 3 a.m., I woke up anyway, checking my phone, staring at the dark screen, waiting for another notification, waiting for them to come back. Story 14. The motel was the kind of place you'd stop at out of necessity rather than choice. It sat just off the highway, its neon sign flickering against the dark sky. The parking lot was mostly empty, save for a few scattered cars. I had been driving for hours and was too tired to keep going, so I pulled in and checked myself into a room. The man at the front desk barely looked up as he handed me the key. The hallway smelled of stale air and cleaning chemicals, but I told myself it was just for one night. My room was small, with outdated furniture and a stiff bedspread. It wasn't the worst place I had ever stayed, but something about it made my skin prickle. As I set my bag down, I noticed the smoke detector on the ceiling. A small red light blinked steadily, which struck me as odd since the room was marked as non-smoking. I shrugged it off at first, assuming it was just part of the system. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I tried to ignore it, but as I settled onto the bed, the blinking caught my eye again. It was too rhythmic, too deliberate. I stared at it for a while, an uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. The longer I watched, the more convinced I became that it wasn't just a regular smoke detector. Curiosity got the better of me. I stood on the bed and reached up, running my fingers over the plastic casing. It felt slightly loose, as if it had been tampered with. My stomach tightened as I twisted it, feeling it shift in my hands. With a small tug, the cover popped off, and that's when I saw it. Inside the hollow space where a regular smoke detector's wiring should have been, there was a small black camera. The lens was aimed directly at the bed, its tiny light blinking in the same steady rhythm I had noticed before. My breath caught in my throat as I processed what I was looking at. Someone had been watching. My pulse pounded as I climbed off the bed, my hands shaking. I grabbed my phone and snapped a picture of the camera, my mind racing. How long had it been there? How many people had stayed in this room without realizing they were being watched? The thought made my skin crawl. I immediately checked the rest of the room. I ran my fingers along the mirror, the TV, the vents. I searched for anything else that looked suspicious, but I didn't find anything. Still, the idea that someone had installed a hidden camera was enough to make my stomach churn. I debated what to do next. Should I go to the front desk and demand answers? Call the police? Part of me wanted to grab my things and leave without looking back. But if I left, the camera would still be there, and someone else would end up in this room, unaware. Taking a deep breath, I grabbed my bag and headed toward the office. The man at the front desk barely glanced up as I approached. "Everything okay?" he asked, sounding bored. My hands tightened into fists. "No, actually. There's a camera inside my smoke detector." His expression didn't change much, but his eyes flicked up to meet mine. "That's so," he said, his voice flat. He didn't sound surprised. That was what unsettled me the most. He didn't ask to see proof, didn't act shocked. It was as if he already knew. I pulled out my phone and showed him the picture. "I'm calling the cops," I said, my voice firmer now. He sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Look, I just work here. If you got a problem with the room, I can give you a refund, and you can be on your way." The nonchalant way he brushed it off sent another wave of unease through me. He wasn't denying it. He wasn't even pretending to be concerned. My mind raced with possibilities. Was he the one who put the camera there, or was it someone else? How many rooms had them? I turned on my heel and walked out, my heart hammering. The moment I got outside, I dialed 911. The dispatcher listened carefully as I explained what I had found. "Stay in a safe location," she instructed. "An officer will be there shortly." I sat in my car, locking the doors and keeping my eyes on the office. It didn't take long for the police to arrive. 2 officers entered the motel while another stayed behind to talk to me. I showed him the picture, explaining how I had found the camera. He took notes, his expression growing more serious as I spoke. "You did the right thing by reporting this," he said. After a while, the officers emerged from the building. One of them was carrying the fake smoke detector, carefully sealed in a plastic evidence bag. The front desk clerk stood by the doorway, his arms crossed, looking annoyed. One of the officers approached me again. "We're going to investigate further," he said. "This isn't the first complaint we've had about this place." His words sent a fresh wave of dread through me. "Not the first?" I asked. He shook his head. "There have been incidents. People checking in and noticing things were off. But this is the first hard evidence we've found." That made me sick to my stomach. The officer advised me to stay somewhere else for the night. I didn't need to be told twice. I drove to the next town, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. I kept thinking about that blinking light, about how many people had slept in that room without ever knowing they were being watched. I checked into a different motel, this time inspecting every inch of the room before settling in. I ran my fingers over every smoke detector, every mirror, every air vent. It wasn't paranoia. It was caution. The experience had shaken me in a way I couldn't fully explain. The next morning I received a call from the officer. "We've got an open case now," he said. "The motel owner claims he didn't know anything about the cameras, but we're looking into it. You might get a follow-up call if we need more information." I thanked him and hung up, but the uneasy feeling never left me. Weeks passed, and I never heard anything else about the case. The motel eventually shut down, but I always wondered what they found, who had been watching, and how long had they gotten away with it. From that night on, I never stayed in a motel without checking every smoke detector. I never ignored blinking lights or shrugged off strange feelings. Because the truth was, you never really knew who might be watching. Story 15. The wooded trail was quiet that morning, the kind of peaceful stillness I enjoyed during my jogs. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and the only sounds were my footsteps and the occasional rustling of small animals in the underbrush. The trail wound through dense trees, cutting through a secluded part of the park where few people ventured this early. It was my usual route, one I had taken countless times without a second thought. As I rounded a bend, I noticed a man ahead of me, walking at a slow, deliberate pace. He wore a dark jacket, his hood up despite the mild weather, and his hands were tucked into his pockets. Something about the way he moved made me uneasy, his steps measured, almost too controlled. I didn't think much of it at first, assuming he was just another early riser out for a walk. But then I noticed something strange. Every time I slowed down, he did too. When I stopped completely, he also stopped, standing motionless on the path as if waiting for something. My pulse quickened, and an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. The trees around us felt closer, the once comforting isolation of the trail now feeling like a trap. I took a deep breath and tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a coincidence. Determined not to let paranoia ruin my run, I picked up my pace, hoping to pass him quickly and put some distance between us. As I approached, I expected him to step aside or acknowledge me in some way, but he didn't. He remained still, his posture rigid, as if he were listening to my footsteps. A chill ran down my spine as I moved past him, refusing to glance in his direction. The moment I was a few yards ahead, I risked a quick look over my shoulder. He had turned around. He wasn't walking away from me anymore, he was now facing the direction I was going. My stomach twisted, and my instincts screamed at me that something was wrong. My steady jog turned into a near sprint, my body moving before my mind could fully process what was happening. I tried to focus on my breathing, on the rhythm of my feet hitting the dirt path, but I could hear him behind me. His steps weren't hurried, but they matched mine perfectly, always maintaining the same distance. No matter how fast I went, he never fell behind, and he never overtook me. The sensation of being followed, of being watched, crawled up my spine like ice. I reached a fork in the trail and made a sharp turn onto the narrower path, hoping to lose him in the dense trees. My legs burned as I pushed myself harder, my heart hammering in my chest. For a few moments I thought I had lost him, that maybe I had overreacted. But then, just as the path curved, I caught sight of him again. He had followed me, matching every turn I had taken. Panic surged through me, making my breath come in short, ragged gasps. I couldn't keep running blindly, I needed to think. Up ahead, there was a small clearing where the trail opened up near a park bench. If I could reach it, maybe someone else would be there, or at least I would have more visibility. I pushed forward, focusing on the open space ahead, willing my legs to move faster. As I burst into the clearing, I scanned my surroundings, searching for another person, a car, anything that would make me feel less alone. But the park was empty. The usual morning walkers and joggers were nowhere to be seen. My only company was the man who had slowed his pace but remained on the trail's edge, watching. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I struggled to unlock the screen. My mind raced through my options: call someone, call the police, act like I wasn't afraid. Before I could decide, he took a step closer, his movements deliberate. I backed away instinctively, my body screaming at me to put as much space between us as possible. "Are you lost?" His voice was low, calm, almost too casual given the situation. The sound of it made my skin crawl. He stood there, waiting for a response, his posture eerily relaxed as if he wasn't the one following me. I forced myself to take a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "No, I'm fine," I said, gripping my phone tighter, "just heading home." His head tilted slightly, as if he were studying me, assessing my reaction. The silence between us stretched uncomfortably, the air thick with something unspoken. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the trail as if nothing had happened. I stood frozen, my legs aching from the tension, my breath shallow and unsteady. My instincts told me to run straight back to my car, but I didn't want to risk him knowing which direction I had come from. Instead, I stayed put, watching the path where he had vanished, waiting to make sure he was really gone. Minutes passed before I dared to move, my body still buzzing with adrenaline. When I finally made my way back to the main road, I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting him to reappear. My car was parked near the entrance of the trail, and I reached it with shaky hands, fumbling with my keys as I climbed inside and locked the doors. As I sat there, trying to steady my breathing, I checked my phone. My fingers hovered over the call button, debating whether to report the encounter. There was no crime, nothing concrete, just a feeling, a deeply unsettling awareness that I had been watched, followed, and possibly lured. My gut told me it hadn't been random. That night, I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, unable to shake the lingering fear. The way he had mirrored my movements, the way he had followed every turn I made, it wasn't normal. I knew that if I had ignored my instincts, if I had let my guard down for even a second, things could have ended very differently. The next morning, I drove past the trail entrance, my eyes scanning for any sign of him. The park looked the same as always, harmless, quiet, ordinary. But I knew better now. Some dangers don't announce themselves with obvious threats or loud warnings. Sometimes they come in the form of a man walking too slowly, stopping when you stop, turning when you turn, waiting for just the right moment. Story 16. My coworker, Daniel, had always been friendly. He was the kind of person who remembered birthdays, asked about weekend plans, and made jokes during slow afternoons at the office. At first, I appreciated his friendliness. It made work more bearable. But then he started mentioning things I knew I had never told him. One morning, he asked if I had fixed the leaky kitchen faucet. My stomach clenched because I had never mentioned the leak at work. Another time, he asked if my bedroom walls were still painted that deep shade of blue. I had never talked about my bedroom to anyone at the office. The unease started to build, but I brushed it off. Maybe I had mentioned these things without remembering. Then it got worse. One day, he casually asked if I had found my missing phone charger. I had lost it the night before and searched my apartment for an hour. There was no way he could have known about that. I forced a laugh, pretending I wasn't unnerved, but my mind raced with questions. How did he know these things? That night, I double-checked my locks. I went through my entire apartment, looking for anything out of place. Nothing seemed disturbed, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been inside. I tried to sleep, but every creak of the building made my heart pound. I was being paranoid, I told myself. It was just a coincidence. The next morning, I arrived at work feeling exhausted. Daniel greeted me with his usual smile, but I could barely look at him. I kept thinking about his words, the way he spoke like he had seen inside my home. I decided to test him. I made up a story about buying a new lamp for my living room, something I hadn't actually done. 2 days later, Daniel asked how I liked the lamp. My blood ran cold. He had no way of knowing about it because it didn't exist. That was when I knew I wasn't imagining things. He had been inside my apartment. I felt my stomach twist as I nodded stiffly, forcing a smile while panic bubbled under my skin. I left work early that day, my hands shaking as I drove home. As soon as I stepped inside my apartment, I checked everything. I searched for hidden cameras, checked my phone for tracking apps, and went through my belongings. Then I looked at my front door. My key was always in my pocket or in my bag. Had he somehow copied it? The thought made my skin crawl. I called my landlord immediately and asked if anyone had requested a copy of my key. At first, he hesitated, but then he admitted that Daniel had asked for one, saying I had given him permission. My blood went cold as I gripped the phone. I had never given permission. Daniel had lied. I changed my locks that night. As I turned the new key in the door, I felt a small sense of relief, but it was overshadowed by fear. How long had he been coming inside? Had he been in my bedroom, standing over me while I slept? The thought made my skin crawl. The next day at work, I acted normal. I didn't want him to know I was on to him. But every time he spoke, every time he smiled, I felt sick. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't want to confront him alone. I needed proof, something I could take to the police. I bought a small security camera and placed it in my living room, aimed at the front door. That night, I barely slept, waiting for something to happen. The next morning, I checked the footage. My stomach dropped as I watched. At 2:34 a.m., my front door opened. Daniel stepped inside like he belonged there. He didn't turn on any lights, but he moved with familiarity, walking straight toward my bedroom door. He stood there for a moment, just standing, watching. Then he turned and walked around my apartment, touching things, moving small objects just slightly. He left after 10 minutes, locking the door behind him. I felt like I couldn't breathe. He'd been inside my home while I slept, standing outside my bedroom door. I replayed the footage over and over, my hands shaking. This wasn't just someone being nosy. This was dangerous. I grabbed my phone and called the police. An officer arrived within the hour. I showed him the footage, my voice unsteady as I explained everything. He took notes, his expression growing darker with each passing second. He told me they would handle it, but I could hear the edge in his voice. He knew this wasn't just a simple break-in. Daniel was arrested at work later that day. The police found my old key in his pocket, along with a notebook filled with details about my home. What time I left for work, what time I came home, what I kept on my nightstand. The officers told me he had been watching me for weeks, maybe longer. The thought made me want to be sick. I had trusted him, laughed at his jokes, worked alongside him every day. And all that time he had been letting himself into my home, walking through my space like he belonged there. I didn't sleep for days after that. Every shadow felt like him, every sound made me jump. Daniel was charged with trespassing and unlawful entry, but that didn't make me feel any safer. Even with a restraining order, even with new locks, the fear didn't fade. My home didn't feel like my own anymore. I moved a few months later, leaving behind the apartment and every memory tied to it. To this day, I still double-check my locks before I sleep. I keep security cameras in every room, always making sure they're on. And I never, ever let anyone get close the way I let Daniel. Because some people don't just cross boundaries, they shatter them. And once that happens, there's no going back. Story 17. The parking lot was nearly empty when I left work that evening. The sun had already set, casting long shadows across the pavement. My footsteps echoed in the quiet as I approached my car, keys in hand. It wasn't until I was close enough to reach for the door handle that I noticed the small white slip tucked under my windshield wiper. I frowned, assuming it was a flyer or some sort of advertisement. With a sigh, I plucked it from the glass and unfolded it. My breath caught as I read the words scrawled in uneven handwriting. "I know you live alone." My stomach twisted, and I quickly looked around, scanning the lot for any sign of movement. The few cars left were scattered across the lot, their dark windows giving no hint of who might still be inside. A cold breeze sent a shiver down my spine as I clutched the note in my shaking hand. I glanced up at the security cameras mounted on the building, hoping they had caught whoever had left it. But as I already knew, that part of the lot wasn't covered. I climbed into my car, locking the doors as soon as I was inside. My heart pounded as I stared at the note, the ink slightly smudged as if written in haste. Was this a joke? A prank from someone at work? The thought didn't sit right. No one I knew would leave something like this. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to calm down. Maybe it was just some random creep trying to scare me. I told myself it didn't mean anything, but my hands were still unsteady as I started the car. The drive home felt longer than usual, every red light stretching into eternity. I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a car following me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I hesitated before getting out. My house sat at the end of a quiet street, the nearest neighbors a good distance away. I had always liked the solitude, but tonight, it felt suffocating. With a deep breath, I stepped out of my car and hurried to the front door, locking it behind me the second I was inside. I turned on every light, the brightness doing little to ease my unease. I double-checked the locks, making sure all the windows were secured. The note sat on my kitchen table, a small but looming presence. I debated calling the police, but what would I even say? That someone had left a vaguely threatening note. There was no real crime, no real proof of danger. Still, I couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in my gut. I barely slept that night, every creak of the house sending a spike of adrenaline through me. When my alarm finally went off, I felt exhausted but relieved that the night had passed without incident. I told myself it had just been a bad joke, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. At work, I kept an eye on my coworkers, looking for any sign of guilt or amusement. No one seemed out of the ordinary. The day dragged on, my mind constantly drifting back to the note. By the time I left for the evening, I was already dreading walking to my car. The parking lot was emptier than the night before, a few scattered cars still remaining. My pulse quickened as I approached my vehicle, scanning the windshield. Nothing. I let out a shaky breath, feeling a small sense of relief. Maybe it really had been a one-time thing. That relief shattered the moment I got home. My porch light flickered, something it had never done before. My stomach sank as I stepped closer, noticing something on my front door. Another note, taped just above the handle. My hands trembled as I peeled it away, my eyes darting to the street behind me. "Did you think I wouldn't find you here?" The message was shorter, but somehow worse. My breath came in shallow gasps as I backed away from the door. Someone had been here, had stood on my porch, had placed this note knowing I would find it. I turned and ran back to my car, my fingers fumbling with my phone as I dialed the police. The dispatcher's voice was calm as they took my information, promising to send someone out. I sat in my locked car, my hands gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The officer who arrived was polite but unimpressed. There were no cameras, no witnesses, no real way to trace the notes. "Or it could be a prank," he said, though his tone lacked conviction. He advised me to be cautious, to report anything else suspicious. Then he left, and I was alone again. I slept with a knife under my pillow that night, every shadow in my bedroom feeling like a threat. The hours crawled by, but nothing happened. The next day, I bought security cameras, installing one above my porch and another overlooking my driveway. At least now, if they came back, I would see them. Days passed without another note, and I began to let my guard down. The cameras showed nothing unusual, and I started to believe that maybe it really had been a cruel joke. But just when I thought I could breathe again, something happened that sent a new wave of terror through me. I was in my living room when I heard the chime of my security system. A notification popped up on my phone, motion detected at the front door. My heart pounded as I opened the app, pulling up the live feed. The screen showed nothing at first, just my porch, dimly lit by the flickering light. Then movement. A shadow shifted just out of view, barely visible at the edge of the camera's range. Someone was there, standing just beyond the frame, as if they knew exactly where the camera's blind spot was. I couldn't breathe. My fingers hovered over my phone, debating whether to call the police again. Then, slowly, the shadow moved. A hand reached out, slipping something under my doormat before retreating into the darkness. I waited until the feed showed nothing but my empty porch before forcing myself to move. My legs felt weak as I approached the door, my stomach twisting with dread. With shaking hands, I lifted the mat and found another note. "I told you I know where you live." My vision blurred with panic as I stumbled backward. My breaths came too fast, my mind racing. This wasn't a joke. It wasn't random. Whoever this was, they were watching, waiting, getting closer. This time, when I called the police, my voice was barely steady. I knew I couldn't stay here alone anymore. The officer who arrived took the situation more seriously, noting the camera footage and the pattern of escalating behavior. They promised to patrol the area more frequently, but it wasn't enough. That night, I packed a bag and left. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, didn't post anything online. I just drove, putting as much distance between myself and that house as possible. I never went back. I never even canceled my lease. Weeks later, a neighbor sent me a message. Someone had broken into my house. The police had found the place empty, but the cameras were ripped from the walls, wires dangling. They'd searched the house and found something else, a final note left on my bedroom floor. Running won't help. I'll always find you. Story 18. The party was already in full swing by the time I arrived, the music thumping through the walls of the packed house. Laughter and conversation blended with the bass, creating a chaotic but energetic atmosphere. I spotted my friends near the kitchen, waving me over with excited grins. The air smelled of alcohol and sweat, but I didn't mind. It was just another weekend gathering, nothing out of the ordinary. I grabbed a drink from the counter, something fruity and strong, and took a sip while chatting with my friends. The room was crowded, bodies pressing together as people danced and talked over the music. I found a spot near the living room where I could breathe, setting my cup down on a side table. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a message from a friend asking if I had made it to the party yet. I answered quickly, and when I looked back, my drink wasn't where I had left it. I frowned, scanning the table in the nearby area. It had definitely been there a moment ago. Maybe someone had moved it by accident. There were so many people crammed into the house that it wasn't impossible. I spotted a cup that looked similar a few inches away, shrugged, and picked it up. Taking a sip, I immediately noticed something was off. The taste was slightly different, bitter, almost metallic, but the alcohol masked most of it. A wave of dizziness hit me so fast that I had to steady myself against the armrest of the couch. My vision blurred for a second, the room tilting slightly. My heart pounded as I tried to shake it off, forcing myself to focus. I turned to find my friend Jess standing nearby, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. "Are you okay?" she asked, stepping closer. I opened my mouth to say yes, but the words felt thick on my tongue. My limbs were heavy, my head swimming with confusion. Jess grabbed my arm before I could stumble, her grip firm and steady. Something wasn't right. I had barely had anything to drink, and yet I felt like I had downed an entire bottle in minutes. Panic crept up my throat as I tried to shake off the fog in my head. Jess looked around quickly, her face tense with concern. "Come on, let's get you out of here," she said, already leading me toward the door. The crowd seemed denser now, the noise overwhelming. My legs felt unsteady, but Jess kept a tight grip on me, guiding me through the throng of people. I could barely process what was happening, my body sluggish and uncooperative. My heartbeat roared in my ears as we finally reached the door, stepping into the cool night air. Jess didn't stop walking, her pace quick and determined as she led me down the driveway. "Just breathe, okay? We need to get you somewhere safe," she said, her voice tense. I tried to nod, but felt like I was moving through molasses. The dizziness was worse now, my thoughts sluggish and jumbled. Something had been in that drink. We made it to her car, and she helped me into the passenger seat, locking the doors as soon as she got in. My hands trembled as I tried to focus, but the edges of my vision were darkening. "Stay with me," Jess said, her voice sharp with urgency. I forced my eyes open, fighting against the pull of unconsciousness. My phone buzzed in my lap, but I couldn't bring myself to check it. Jess was already driving, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. "We're going to the hospital," she said, glancing at me with worried eyes. The words barely registered, my head feeling like it was floating. I wanted to respond, to tell her I was okay, but my body wasn't listening. The car ride was a blur, the city lights streaking past in a haze of color. I felt myself fading in and out, my body heavy and unresponsive. Jess kept talking, her voice the only thing anchoring me to reality. I focused on the sound, clinging to it as my mind threatened to slip away. When we arrived at the hospital, Jess ran inside to get help. Moments later, a nurse and a security guard appeared, helping me into a wheelchair. My body felt like lead, my limbs refusing to cooperate. The bright lights of the emergency room stung my eyes as they wheeled me inside, the world spinning around me. The doctor asked me questions, but I struggled to answer, my tongue thick and heavy. Jess answered for me, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. They ran tests, checking my vitals and drawing blood. The minutes stretched into hours, the dizziness slowly fading but leaving me exhausted and shaken. The doctor returned with a serious expression, confirming what Jess had suspected. Something had been slipped into my drink, a sedative commonly used in cases of drink spiking. My stomach turned at the thought, the realization making me feel sick. Someone had tried to drug me, and if Jess hadn't noticed, I might not have made it out of that party safely. The thought sent a cold shiver down my spine. Who had done it? Was it a stranger, someone I had never met? Or was it someone at the party, blending into the crowd like nothing had happened? The idea made my skin crawl, fear settling deep in my bones. Jess stayed with me the entire time, her presence a comfort in the midst of everything. When the doctor finally cleared me to leave, she helped me to her car, her arm steadying me as we walked. The night air felt different now, no longer just cool, but unsettling, filled with shadows that suddenly felt too close. As we drove away from the hospital, the events of the night replayed in my head. The drink, the dizziness, the way Jess had immediately known something was wrong. If she hadn't been there, if I had been alone, I didn't want to think about what could have happened. Jess glanced at me, her expression serious. "We're not going back to that house," she said firmly. I nodded, the weight of exhaustion settling over me. I didn't want to go back either. The next morning, the reality of what had happened fully sank in. My hands shook as I scrolled through messages from people at the party, some asking where I had gone, others completely unaware of what had transpired. Jess had already called the police, reporting what had happened in case it wasn't an isolated incident. I felt violated, angry, and scared all at once. Someone had targeted me, had waited for me to be distracted before slipping something into my drink. The thought made my stomach churn, a deep unease settling in my chest. From that night on, I never left my drink unattended again. I never took a sip from something I hadn't poured myself. And I never forgot the way Jess had saved me, pulling me out before it was too late. Story 19. The shrill sound of the smoke alarm ripped me from sleep. My heart pounded as I sat up, my mind struggling to catch up with reality. The high-pitched beeping echoed through my apartment, relentless and urgent. I scrambled out of bed, adrenaline surging through my veins. I smelled the air, expecting the acrid scent of smoke, but there was nothing. The room was dim, the only light coming from the digital clock on my nightstand. My pulse pounded in my ears as I rushed toward the door. The alarm continued, piercing and insistent, forcing me into motion. I reached the front door and pressed my palm against it, feeling for heat. It was cool. My brows furrowed as I hesitated, glancing at the peephole. The hallway outside was still and empty, no signs of flickering flames or thick, rolling smoke. Something didn't feel right. Still, the alarm was deafening. I unlocked the door and pulled it open, expecting chaos. Instead, I was met with silence. There was no fire, no smell of burning, no neighbors evacuating in a panic. The hallway was eerily quiet, the dim overhead lights buzzing softly. Then I saw it. The smoke detector sat on the floor, its plastic casing gleaming under the hallway light. My stomach dropped as I stepped closer. It wasn't my smoke detector. Mine was still mounted on the ceiling in my apartment, screaming its alarm into the empty space. Someone had placed this one outside my door. It sat in a shallow bowl filled with steaming water. The heat had triggered the alarm, making it go off just as if there were smoke in the air. My breath caught in my throat as I stared at the setup. Someone had done this intentionally. Someone had wanted me to come outside. A prickle of unease crept up my spine. I glanced down the hallway, my pulse hammering. Every door was shut, no movement, no signs of life. I swallowed hard and took a cautious step back, my body tensing as I scanned the corridor. I wasn't alone. I could feel it. My apartment door was still wide open behind me, a dark void leading back into safety. I considered stepping out, looking around the corner, checking if someone was lurking nearby. But every instinct screamed at me to go back inside. My fingers curled into fists as I forced myself to breathe. I stepped backward into my apartment, never taking my eyes off the hallway. My hand found the doorknob, gripping it tightly. Just as I was about to shut the door, I saw a shadow shift at the end of the hall. A figure, barely visible in the dim lighting, moved out of sight. My blood turned to ice. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hand shaking. My breaths came fast and shallow as I pressed my back against the wood, listening. Silence stretched on the other side. I stayed frozen, every muscle tense, waiting for something to happen. Minutes passed, the alarm still blaring inside my apartment. I forced myself to move, grabbing a chair to reach the smoke detector. I yanked it from the ceiling, silencing the noise in an instant. The sudden quiet was almost worse. The tension in the air didn't dissipate. I crept back to the peephole, my heart hammering in my chest. The hallway was empty again. The bowl of water and smoke detector still sat in front of my door, an unsettling reminder that someone had been here, that someone had wanted me to come outside. I stepped back and grabbed my phone with trembling fingers. My first thought was to call the police, but what would I even say? There was no immediate threat, no proof of danger, just a gut-wrenching feeling that I had narrowly avoided something terrible. I decided to wait. Maybe whoever had done this would leave, realizing I wasn't going to fall for their trick. I turned off all the lights in my apartment, making it seem like I had gone back to sleep. Then I sat by the door, foam clutched in my hands, listening. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching into eternity. I strained to hear any sounds from the hallway, footsteps, movement, anything. The silence was suffocating. I knew someone was still out there. They were waiting. Then, the softest noise. A shuffle, barely audible. My stomach twisted. I held my breath, my pulse pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The sound grew closer. Then, a gentle tap on my door. I nearly dropped my phone. The knock wasn't loud, wasn't aggressive. It was soft, patient, like someone was testing to see if I would react. My fingers tightened around my phone, my body rigid with fear. I didn't move, didn't make a sound. The knock came again, just as quiet. A slow, deliberate rhythm. Whoever was on the other side wasn't leaving. My breath came in shallow bursts as I stared at the door, my mind racing. Then, after what felt like an eternity, the knocking stopped. Silence stretched out once more. I didn't dare look through the peephole, afraid of what I might see. My muscles ached from the tension, but I stayed frozen, waiting. Another minute passed. Then 2. Then 5. I forced myself to move, inching closer to the door. I leaned in, my ear barely brushing against the wood. Nothing. No breathing, no shifting. It was like they had never been there at all. But I knew better. After another agonizing 10 minutes, I finally risked a glance through the peephole. The hallway was empty. My pulse remained high as I hesitated, then slowly unbolted the door. Just a crack, just enough to peek outside. The smoke detector and bowl were gone. The only sign that anything had happened was the lingering damp spot on the floor. My skin crawled as I realized whoever had been there had taken their setup with them. No trace, no evidence, nothing. I shut the door again and locked it, my hands still trembling. Sleep wouldn't come that night, no matter how much I tried to convince myself it was over. I stayed awake, listening to the quiet, waiting for another knock. Morning eventually came, but the fear didn't fade. I told myself it was a one-time thing, some sick prank, but the unease lingered. Someone had wanted me to step outside. Someone had waited in the darkness. And worst of all, I had no idea if they would try again. Story 20. The highway stretched out before me, dark and nearly deserted, the occasional streetlight casting brief pools of light on the asphalt. It was late, and I was exhausted, my hands gripping the steering wheel tighter than necessary. The steady hum of my tires on the road was the only sound, aside from the low music playing on the radio. I just wanted to get home, take a shower, and collapse into bed. A pair of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, gaining on me quickly. I barely paid attention at first, assuming it was just another late-night driver. But then the lights flickered once, twice, then again. I frowned, glancing up, wondering if they were trying to signal me about something. Maybe I had left my gas cap open or my taillights were out. The car stayed close, their high beams flashing at irregular intervals, almost frantic. A spike of unease crept into my chest, and I gritted my teeth. Maybe it was just some jerk messing with me, trying to freak me out on an empty road. I pressed the gas pedal slightly, putting more distance between us, but they matched my speed. My pulse quickened as I debated what to do. The road ahead was still empty, no signs of civilization nearby. Stopping here felt like a bad idea, but so did ignoring whatever they were trying to tell me. The flashes continued, and my nerves finally won. I pulled over to the shoulder, my heart hammering in my chest. The car behind me slowed and stopped a few feet away. The driver's door opened, and a man stepped out, his silhouette dark against the headlights. I rolled down my window just enough to hear him, my fingers poised to hit the lock button. He raised his hands, a cautious gesture, and took a step closer. "Hey," he called out, his voice urgent but not aggressive. "You need to get out of the car, right now." A chill ran down my spine. "Why?" I asked, my voice more defensive than I intended. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel, my mind racing. "There's someone in your backseat," he said, his face pale in the glow of my brake lights. "I saw them when you passed under the streetlight back there." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I sucked in a sharp breath, my body frozen in place. My rearview mirror was angled just enough that I couldn't see the backseat clearly. Slowly I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling. My reflection in the mirror stared back at me, eyes wide with fear. I didn't want to turn around. Every instinct screamed at me not to look. The man outside took another step forward, his eyes darting between me and my car. "Get out," he urged. "Just get out and come over here." I hesitated, my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. If he was telling the truth, there was someone behind me, mere inches away, waiting. If he was lying, this could be a setup to get me out of my car. Either way, I was trapped. I took a shaky breath and made my decision. In one swift motion, I yanked the door handle and threw myself out, stumbling onto the gravel shoulder. I turned back just in time to see movement in the backseat, a shadow shifting, too fast to be my imagination. The next second, my driver's side door flew open. A figure lunged out, dressed in dark clothing, their face obscured by the night. Without thinking, I bolted toward the man who had warned me. He grabbed my arm and pulled me behind him as the intruder scrambled out of my car. The stranger hesitated, as if weighing his options, before darting into the darkness on foot. My legs felt like they might give out. The man beside me kept a firm grip on my arm, his eyes locked on the spot where the figure had disappeared. Neither of us spoke for several seconds, our breathing heavy in the silence. "You okay?" he finally asked, his voice softer now. I nodded, though my entire body was trembling. "I think so." I turned to look at my car, still idling, the driver's side door swinging slightly in the wind. The idea that someone had been in there with me for who knows how long made my stomach twist. The man ran a hand through his hair, exhaling sharply. "I saw them when you passed me a few miles back. I wasn't sure at first, but then when you hit that stretch of light, I saw movement in your backseat." His expression darkened. "I couldn't just let you keep driving like that." I swallowed hard, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice unsteady. "I don't even want to think about what could have happened if I hadn't stopped." He nodded, glancing toward the trees where the intruder had vanished. "Do you want me to call the cops?" I nodded again, my throat too tight to speak. He pulled out his phone and made the call while I stood there, arms wrapped around myself, staring at my car. I kept expecting to see another shadow inside, another movement just beyond my vision. The police arrived within 10 minutes, their flashing lights cutting through the night. They checked my car, shining their flashlights inside, but the intruder had left nothing behind. No sign of forced entry, no personal belongings, just the unsettling fact that they had been there, hiding, waiting. An officer took my statement while another swept the nearby area, though I knew they wouldn't find anything. The man who had helped me stayed by my side, offering quiet reassurance when I faltered. When I finally sat back in my car, the officer leaned down by my window. "We'll patrol the area and see if we find anything," he said. "But if you notice anything strange in the next few days, don't hesitate to call." I thanked him, my voice barely above a whisper. The officer gave a small nod before stepping back. The man who had saved me lingered for a moment. "Drive safe, okay?" he said. "And maybe check your back seat from now on." I managed a weak smile, though the fear still clung to me. "Yeah, I will." As I pulled back onto the road, I kept glancing in my rearview mirror, half expecting to see another shadow lurking there. But the back seat was empty now, just as it should have been. Even so, I knew I would never drive at night the same way again. Story 21. The building loomed before me, its rusted frame and shattered windows whispering of years of neglect. I'd heard the rumors about its haunted past and the strange things that people claimed to have seen, but I wasn't scared. The thrill of exploring forgotten places was strong to resist. I had my flashlight in hand and my camera slung around my neck, eager to document whatever secrets the building might hold. I pushed through the rotting door, its hinges creaking as if it had been waiting for me. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. The floors groaned under my weight as I carefully navigated my way through the debris. Old, torn papers littered the floor, and graffiti covered the walls, just the usual signs of vandalism, nothing too unusual. I was looking for something different, something more hidden. As I moved deeper into the building, I passed rooms filled with forgotten furniture, some broken and others still surprisingly intact. It felt like the building had been abandoned only days ago, but there was something eerie about it. The air felt stagnant, heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. It wasn't until I entered a small, dimly lit room that I noticed something strange. A sleeping bag, fresh and still unrolled, lay on the floor near a corner. It stood out like a beacon, too recent to belong to the building's long-departed tenants. Beside it were several water bottles, some half-empty, and a half-eaten granola bar that had been carelessly discarded. The contents seemed far too normal for a place like this, almost like they had been placed deliberately for someone to find. I crouched down to inspect the items, my fingers brushing the sleeping bag. It was warm, which sent a wave of unease through me. The sensation of someone having recently been there made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My heart started to race, but I pushed the fear aside, telling myself that it was probably just some homeless person using the building as a shelter. It wasn't unusual for abandoned places to attract squatters. That's when I spotted the knife. It was lying next to the sleeping bag, the blade glinting in the faint light. It looked out of place, too clean, too deliberate. I leaned in closer, my curiosity outweighing my instinct to leave. The blade was sharp, the handle well worn. It didn't seem like something someone would leave behind, unless it had been used for something unsettling. I stood up quickly, my stomach twisting. Something was wrong. The items scattered around the room were too perfect, too carefully arranged. It felt like a trap, like someone was waiting for me to discover them, and that thought made my pulse quicken. I glanced around, the feeling of being watched crawling over me like a cold shadow. I was about to turn and leave when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps echoing through the hall behind me. My heart skipped a beat. I froze, the blood draining from my face. The footsteps were slow and deliberate, echoing off the cracked walls. They weren't the hurried steps of someone trying to get away. No, these were controlled, purposeful steps, as if the person was aware of my presence and was simply waiting for the right moment to reveal themselves. I didn't dare turn around, afraid that if I moved, the person would hear me. The building felt suddenly smaller, the walls closing in on me. I needed to get out, but my legs wouldn't move. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, just the wind or an animal, but deep down I knew it wasn't. My mind raced with thoughts of the sleeping bag, the knife, the water bottles, all signs that someone had been living here. And now, there was someone behind me, getting closer with every passing second. I took a slow, shaky breath, my fingers trembling as I gripped my flashlight. The footsteps grew louder, closer. Whoever it was had to be just a few feet away by now. I could feel their presence, like a cold weight pressing against me. Then, without warning, the footsteps stopped. For a moment there was complete silence and unnatural stillness that hung in the air, making the hairs on my arms stand on end. I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was paralyzed by fear, my body frozen in place, unable to do anything but listen. I could feel the tension building, my mind screaming for me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. And then, just as suddenly, the silence was broken. A low, guttural sound echoed from behind me, a voice, but not quite human. It was raspy, like it had been years since the person had spoken. My blood ran cold, and my heart hammered in my chest. I knew I had to move, had to do something, but the sound paralyzed me. "Get out," the voice rasped, its tone cold and threatening. My body jolted into action at the words. the primal urge to flee overwhelming everything else. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was no one there. The hallway behind me was empty. I scanned the room in a panic, my flashlight sweeping over the shadows, but the only thing I could see was the flickering light bouncing off the walls. The footsteps had stopped, the voice had stopped, and there was nothing but the heavy silence that felt like it was suffocating me. I didn't stay to find out what was going on. My body was moving before my brain could process what had happened. I bolted for the door, sprinting through the dimly lit hallways and back out into the open air. I didn't stop until I was outside, gasping for breath, my legs shaking beneath me. The building loomed behind me, its dark windows staring down like hollow eyes, watching me leave. I didn't look back. I don't know who or what was living in that abandoned building, but I had a feeling I wouldn't be the last person to find the sleeping bag, the water bottles, and the knife. And I was certain I never wanted to know what else that place held. Story 22. I had rented a storage unit a few months ago. It was nothing fancy, just a small space for my extra stuff, old furniture, boxes of clothes, and some sentimental items that didn't have a place in my apartment. The facility was clean, well lit, and seemed safe enough. I had visited a few times before without incident, and nothing ever seemed out of the ordinary. But one afternoon, as I opened the metal door to my unit, I felt a chill crawl up my spine. At first, I didn't notice anything out of the ordinary. The shelves were still in the same places, stacked with boxes, and the old leather chair I had tucked away was still there. But something felt off, like the air was too still, the silence too thick. I was about to leave when I spotted it, a small piece of fabric sticking out from under a pile of old blankets. It was a faded blue sheet, crumpled in a way that suggested someone had recently used it. My heart skipped a beat. I pulled the fabric aside, and what I found next made my stomach drop. Beneath the sheet, there was a small pile of bedding, dirty pillows, used blankets, and a few food wrappers scattered around. The smell hit me then, a mix of old food, sweat, and something metallic. I took a step back, my eyes scanning the space, my mind racing with questions. Was someone living here? It couldn't be possible. I paid my rent on time, and the storage unit had been locked every time I came. I turned around, looking for any sign of someone hiding in the corner. There was no one. The unit was still and quiet, save for the faint sound of my breathing. My hand shook as I pulled out my phone, calling the storage facility's manager. I needed answers. The phone rang for what felt like forever before someone picked up. "Hi, this is Rachel from Greenway Storage. How can I help you?" "Rachel, it's me, Unit 342. I think someone's been living in my storage unit," I said, my voice shaking. There was a pause on the other end. "What do you mean living there? Are you sure?" I just found bedding, food wrappers, and I stopped myself, not sure how to explain it. "There's no other explanation. Someone has been using this space." "I'll send someone over right away," she said, her tone sounding more concerned than before. I hung up, feeling the weight of the situation settle deeper into my chest. The thought of someone living in my storage unit was almost unbelievable. Who would do that? Why would they choose my unit, and how had they been able to get in? I stared at the bedding again, the sheets crumpled in a way that made it clear they hadn't been there long. This wasn't something that had been going on for months. It felt recent, like it had only just happened. The minutes felt like hours as I waited for someone to arrive. My mind kept spinning, trying to make sense of everything. But what would happen if the person came back while I was still here? What if they were watching me right now, hidden somewhere in the shadows of the unit? I swallowed hard, trying to push the thought out of my mind, but it lingered. Finally, Rachel arrived, followed by a security guard. He was tall, with a stern expression that didn't seem to soften as he surveyed the unit. Rachel looked worried, her brow furrowed as she examined the bedding and wrappers scattered around the floor. "This is strange," Rachel said after a moment. "We have security cameras on site. No one should be able to get in without checking in at the front desk first." The guard nodded but said nothing. He started to inspect the unit more closely, his flashlight sweeping over the floor, the shelves, and the corners. I stood back, watching, my arms crossed tightly against my chest. "We'll need to look at the security footage," the guard finally said, his voice low. Rachel nodded and pulled out her phone, walking toward the main office. I stood in the middle of the storage unit, feeling completely out of place. The realization hit me then. This wasn't just about a stranger getting access to my things. Someone had been watching me, studying my routine. There was no other way they could have known when I would visit. The door creaked as it opened, and Rachel returned with the footage on her phone. She played it, her thumb scrolling through the video clips. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to see what had happened. My stomach churned as I watched myself walking into the unit, casually pulling open the door and stepping inside. But there was something else I hadn't noticed before. A figure in the shadows, barely visible, lurking just outside the camera's view. It wasn't a clear shot, but it was enough to send a cold wave through me. Someone had been there, hidden while I went about my business, waiting until I left to make their move. Rachel's face grew pale as she continued scrolling through the footage. "This doesn't make any sense," she muttered. "How did they get in without us noticing?" It was the first time I saw the true depth of the situation. The person didn't just take my things or vandalize the unit. They had been watching me. They knew exactly when I'd come in, and they had been living here for who knows how long. "Have you noticed anything unusual in the past month?" the guard asked, looking at me. "Anything different when you visited?" I thought back, trying to remember if anything had felt off. But I hadn't seen anything. No strange sounds, no signs of someone else being there. I shook my head. No, everything seemed fine until today. The guard sighed, shaking his head in disbelief. "We'll have to contact the police. This is serious." I nodded, feeling the weight of the situation sink in. They would have to investigate, but I didn't know how they'd find this person. The fact that they had been hiding in plain sight, unnoticed by anyone, made me realize just how much they'd been watching me. How long had they been there? How many times had they seen me come and go, completely unaware of their presence? I left the unit that day, shaken and unsettled. The thought of someone living in my storage space, tracking my movements, was enough to make my skin crawl. I couldn't help but wonder if they were still out there, watching me. And I wondered how many others had been caught in the same situation without ever knowing. Story 23. My sister and I were on the last stretch of a long road trip when we decided to stop at a small gas station just off the highway. The sun was setting, casting an orange glow over the landscape. We hadn't planned to stop there, but we both needed a break, and the gas station seemed like a good place to stretch our legs. The convenience store was quiet, with just a few cars in the lot. I grabbed my wallet and headed toward the door, with my sister following closely behind. As soon as we entered, a man caught my attention. He was standing by the coffee machine, his back slightly turned, but something about the way he positioned himself made me uneasy. I didn't know why at first, but there was a strange, still energy about him. We walked past him toward the cooler, each of us grabbing a bottle of water and a snack. I kept an eye on the man, though I didn't want to seem paranoid. He hadn't moved, still standing in the same spot by the coffee machine, but I noticed his gaze flicking back and forth, like he was watching us without making it obvious. My sister and I exchanged a quick glance, but we didn't say anything. It was probably nothing. As we made our way to the counter to pay, I saw the man's reflection in the glass doors of the cooler. He was closer now, walking right behind us. My heart skipped a beat. He hadn't been that close before. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I was being dramatic. Still, the unease crept up my spine. We made it to the counter, and as I handed the cashier my card, I noticed the man was standing just behind us now, staring at us. It was hard to ignore the feeling that he was waiting for something, watching us, sizing us up. My sister must have felt it too, because she kept glancing over her shoulder, her hand tightening around the bottle in her grip. "Do you need something?" I asked, trying to sound calm but noticing how my voice wavered slightly. The man didn't respond at first. Instead, he shifted slightly, moving so that he was standing directly behind us. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. My sister's eyes widened, and I could tell she was starting to panic. Before I could even process what was happening, the man took a step forward, blocking the exit. My heart started pounding in my chest as I looked around the store for help. The cashier had already turned back to the register, and there was no one else in sight. I tried to stay composed, but the feeling of being trapped settled over me. I could feel my sister's breath quickening beside me. She was on the verge of saying something when the man spoke, his voice low and grating. "You're not in a hurry, are you?" he asked. I froze. His words weren't a question, they were a statement. There was no mistaking the intent behind them. It was as though he was trying to manipulate us into staying longer, to make us feel uncomfortable, to make us unsure of ourselves. I swallowed hard, looking at my sister out of the corner of my eye. She seemed just as scared as I was, but she wasn't going to let him see that. I had to think fast. "We need to go," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Move, please." The man didn't budge. He just stood there, staring at us with an unsettling calmness. It was like he was daring us to make a move. I felt trapped, with nowhere to go. That's when the door opened, and a man entered the store. He was a bit older than us, wearing a worn-out jacket and jeans, but something about his presence was different. He looked at the man blocking our path, then at us, noticing our tension. Without a word, the new arrival walked over to the counter, then turned to the man blocking the door. His voice was firm, authoritative. "Hey buddy, move aside. These girls aren't interested." The man blocking the door looked taken aback, as if he hadn't expected anyone to intervene. He glanced at the older man, then back at us, his gaze lingering for a moment too long. Without saying anything else, he stepped aside, allowing us to walk past him and toward the door. I didn't wait for him to change his mind. I grabbed my sister's arm and practically yanked her out of the store, my heart racing. We stepped outside, the cool night air hitting us like a slap in the face. Once we were safely in the car, I locked the doors immediately, still shaken by what had just happened. My sister and I sat there in silence for a moment, processing everything. That was way too close," she said, her voice shaky. I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. I don't know what that guy's deal was, but it didn't feel right. The man who had intervened appeared at the door, looking in our direction for a moment before disappearing inside. We stayed in the car for a few minutes longer, too anxious to leave. Eventually, we decided to continue on our trip, but neither of us said much as we drove away. The unsettling encounter at the gas station lingered in the air between us, a quiet tension we couldn't shake. The rest of the trip passed without incident, but that moment stayed with me. Every time I thought about it, I wondered what would have happened if the stranger hadn't stepped in. Would the man have let us go eventually, or would he have forced us to stay? I'll never know for sure. One thing was clear, though: we were both grateful for that unexpected intervention. The whole encounter reminded us just how vulnerable we can be, even in the most ordinary places. And no matter how much we tried to rationalize it, there was no ignoring the fact that something didn't feel right that day. Story 24. I had been looking forward to the weekend at my friend's house for weeks. She lived in a quiet suburban neighborhood, a place I had always found peaceful and safe. We spent the evening watching movies, catching up, and enjoying the break from our usual routines. It was the kind of night you don't want to end, with no cares except the comfort of good company and the warmth of a familiar place. Around midnight, the atmosphere shifted. As we sat chatting in the living room, I noticed something unusual. A small red dot had appeared on the curtains, moving slowly across the fabric. At first, I thought it was a reflection, maybe from something outside. But the dot kept moving, tracing an almost deliberate path. It seemed too precise to be a random light. I pointed it out to my friend, and she squinted at the curtains. "That's weird," she said, sounding more curious than alarmed. We both sat there for a moment, watching as the red dot moved in small, steady increments. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, but I dismissed it as an overactive imagination. Then I had an idea. "Let's turn off the lights and see if we can figure out what it is," I suggested. My friend agreed, and we quickly shut off the lights in the living room. The sudden darkness made the red dot more prominent, and now we could see it clearly moving across the curtains, slowly but purposefully. We stared at it for a few moments, both of us unsure of what to do. The more I watched the dot, the more it began to feel unsettling. It wasn't just any light. It was too consistent, too controlled. It wasn't coming from any ordinary source, like a passing car or a street lamp. And that's when I realized something. It wasn't just a reflection or a trick of the light. Someone was outside, and they were shining the laser through the window. I felt a chill run down my spine as the realization hit me. "Someone's out there," I whispered, my voice tight. My friend's face drained of color as she turned to look at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice shaky. I felt a surge of panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Stay quiet," I replied. "Let's just stay still and see what happens." We both sat frozen in the dark, the only light coming from that eerie red dot moving across the curtains. My mind raced with questions. Who was out there? Why were they targeting us? Was this a harmless prank, or something more dangerous? I kept my eyes fixed on the dot, trying to make sense of it. Every second that passed felt like an eternity. As we sat there in silence, the dot continued its slow journey across the curtains. I was beginning to feel like we were being watched, the tension building with every movement of the laser. My heart pounded in my chest, and I felt an overwhelming urge to do something, anything, to make the situation feel less threatening. But I knew we had to remain quiet and wait. Then, the dot stopped moving. For a moment, I thought the person outside had lost interest and left. But just as I started to relax, I heard a faint noise, a rustling sound coming from outside the window. My blood ran cold as I realized the person was still there, still watching us. The rustling continued, and then I heard what sounded like a faint shuffle of footsteps. They were getting closer to the window. I looked over at my friend, her face pale and anxious. We both knew that we couldn't just sit here anymore. "I'm calling the cops," I said, my voice steady despite the fear creeping into my chest. My friend nodded, but before I could reach for my phone, I heard the unmistakable sound of something tapping lightly against the window. It was subtle at first, but then it grew louder, more deliberate. Someone was trying to get our attention. The tapping stopped, but the red dot didn't move. It lingered there like a signal, waiting. I felt trapped. I had no idea how long the person had been out there, or if they were still lingering nearby. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to grab my friend and bolt for the door, but I knew that wasn't an option. I finally managed to pull my phone from my pocket and dial 911. As I waited for the operator to pick up, I kept my eyes glued to the window. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice broke through the tension, and I spoke quickly, explaining the situation. There's someone outside my friend's house, shining a red laser through the window. We think they're trying to spy on us. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line while she sent officers to our location. I hung up and turned to my friend. "The cops are on their way," I said, trying to reassure her. "Just stay calm. We'll be okay." But the fear in her eyes told me she wasn't so sure. We stayed in the dark, listening for any movement outside. The red dot stayed motionless, as if it was waiting for something. We heard a distant car engine and the sound of tires on gravel. It was faint at first, but it grew louder, and I realized the person outside must have heard it too. Suddenly the dot vanished. We both froze, staring at the curtains, waiting for it to reappear. But there was nothing. Not a sound, not a movement. The silence was deafening, and for a moment, I thought the person had left. Then we heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, this time coming from the front yard. A car door slammed, and we could see headlights in the distance, approaching slowly. My heart skipped a beat. The police had arrived. I could see their flashing lights reflecting off the walls, and relief washed over me. The officers approached the house, and after a brief search, they found nothing outside. There were no signs of anyone being there, no footprints in the yard, no car parked nearby. The red dot had disappeared as quickly as it had appeared. The officers said they'd patrol the area for the rest of the night, but they couldn't do much more without evidence. Even though the situation seemed to have calmed down, the unease lingered. I couldn't shake the feeling that we had narrowly escaped something worse. As the officers left and the night grew quieter, I kept looking out the window, half expecting the red dot to return. It didn't. But I knew that whoever had been out there was still nearby, somewhere in the shadows. Story 25. The hike had been everything I'd hoped for. The trail was quiet, surrounded by towering trees and the soft rustling of leaves. I had decided to spend the day alone, away from the distractions of work and life, finding peace in the solitude of nature. The sun filtered through the canopy above, casting dappled shadows on the ground as I walked, breathing in the cool, fresh air. The path was well marked, and I had no intention of getting lost. It was a familiar trail, one I'd hiked before. My plan was simple: take the loop, enjoy the scenery, and return to my car by late afternoon. As I walked deeper into the woods, the sounds of civilization faded into the background, leaving only the natural rhythm of the world around me. I reached the peak of the trail after a couple of hours, and the view was breathtaking. A sweeping valley stretched out before me, with a distant outline of mountains framing the horizon. I sat on a large rock, enjoying the stillness of the moment, letting my mind drift away. It was exactly what I needed. A peaceful escape from the hustle and bustle of everyday life. After some time, I turned to begin my descent. The trail was quieter now, with no one else in sight. The solitude felt comforting, and I found myself slowing my pace, savoring the serenity of the woods. The sound of my footsteps on the dirt path and the occasional bird call were the only noises that accompanied me on the way down. By the time I reached the trailhead again, the light was beginning to soften as the sun started its descent behind the trees. The parking lot was empty, save for my car. I had parked at the far end, where the trees formed a natural boundary, offering a sense of privacy and isolation. It was the kind of spot where you could just be, without the worry of others coming and going. But now, as I approached my car, something didn't feel right. My heart skipped a beat when I saw that the driver's side door was ajar. I was sure I'd locked it. The lock had made a distinctive click when I got out earlier, and I always double-checked before leaving my car. But now, the door was wide enough to see the faint outline of the seat inside. I froze for a moment, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Maybe the wind had somehow nudged it open. I wasn't sure, but I didn't want to take any chances. I rushed over to the car and quickly closed the door, making sure it was locked again. I double-checked the back doors, then the passenger side. Everything seemed normal, except for that one small detail: the door had been left open. I felt a tightness in my chest, unease settling into my bones. I didn't want to panic, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I reached for the door handle and tried to open the glove compartment, but it was stuck. My heart pounded as I wrenched it open, and that's when I saw my spare key was missing. I always kept it there, hidden in the compartment for emergencies, but now it was gone. I could feel the blood drain from my face, my thoughts racing. Who had been in my car? And why would they take my spare key? I scanned the parking lot again, my eyes darting around, searching for anyone nearby. There was no one in sight, no sign of any other vehicles having been around when I returned. I had been alone on the trail, and I hadn't seen anyone else there when I parked. A strange, unsettling chill ran down my spine. Had someone been watching me? Had they been waiting for me to leave before getting into my car? I quickly pulled out my phone, checking for any missed messages or notifications, but there was nothing. No one had tried to contact me. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows or damage to the car. But that spare key, it was gone. Whoever had taken it knew exactly where it was, and they had been bold enough to take it without a trace. I quickly locked the car again and walked over to the nearby woods, hoping to see anything that might explain what had happened. I checked the surrounding area, moving carefully between the trees and underbrush, but found nothing that seemed out of place. My mind was racing. Should I call the police? But what could they do? There was no evidence of a crime, no clear proof that anyone had been in my car. As I walked back toward my car, I tried to calm myself. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe it was just a weird coincidence. Perhaps I had forgotten to lock the door, and my key had somehow fallen out of the glove compartment. But something about the whole situation felt too calculated. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone had been waiting for the right moment to get into my car. I made a quick decision to drive to the nearest gas station, not wanting to stay at the trailhead for a second longer. As I drove, I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone following me. My eyes constantly flicked to the side, looking for any sign that I wasn't alone. The drive felt longer than it should have, each mile dragging by as I kept scanning the roads around me. When I finally reached the gas station, I parked under a bright light and stayed in my car for a few moments, trying to collect myself. I wasn't sure what had happened, but I knew I needed to take some precautions. I called my friend, explaining what had happened, and asking for advice. She suggested I get my locks changed and report the incident, just in case someone had been targeting me. I made plans to go to the police station the next morning, but the feeling of unease stayed with me long after the night had passed. I couldn't shake the thought that someone had been waiting for me, someone who knew exactly where to look. And that spare key had still nigged at me, a symbol of vulnerability I couldn't ignore. I kept wondering if I'd ever really be alone again. Story 26. I was sitting at my usual coffee shop, the one by the corner with the cozy chairs and quiet atmosphere. I'd been coming there for years, finding comfort in the routine of it. That day I had a bit of extra time, so I decided to snap a photo of my latte, the frothy design still perfect in the cup. I shared it on my Instagram account, captioning it with a simple "just another morning ritual." Minutes later, my phone buzzed with a notification. It was a comment on the post. I opened it, expecting something casual like "looks good" or "yum." But instead, the comment caught me off guard. "I love the blue shirt you're wearing. Looks great with the sunlight coming through the window." I stared at the screen, confused. I wasn't wearing a blue shirt. In fact, I was wearing a red one. I blinked a few times, unsure if I had misread the comment. Maybe I had posted a photo from a previous day by mistake. I scrolled through the photo again, trying to find any hint of a blue shirt in the image. But no, there was nothing like that. Just me in my bright red shirt, sipping coffee with the window's sunlight casting a warm glow around me. I felt an uneasy shiver run down my spine. The comment wasn't just wrong, it felt off. Something about it didn't sit right. I looked at the username of the person who commented, at nomad_91. The name didn't ring any bells. I didn't recognize it at all. I clicked on their profile, half expecting it to be some random account. But the profile was private. There were no photos, no information about who this person might be, just a blank, empty space that felt eerily distant. My fingers hovered over the screen. I wasn't sure if I should ignore it or reply. The rational part of me told me it was just some odd coincidence. But something told me that wasn't the case. I decided to reply, trying to keep it light. "Haha, actually I'm wearing red, but thanks." I sent the message, thinking that would end it. I returned to my coffee and tried to shake off the discomfort, but it lingered in the back of my mind. Who would comment on such a trivial detail about a shirt, especially when it was wrong? The more I thought about it, the more unsettling it became. I had no idea where the person had even gotten the idea I was wearing blue. A few minutes passed, and I went back to scrolling through my feed, trying to distract myself. I'd almost forgotten about the strange comment when my phone buzzed again. Another notification from the same person. This time, my stomach twisted as I opened it. "I also saw you checking out the books in the back corner. You seemed interested in that old paperback. It's nice you're getting into literature." I froze. My breath caught in my throat. The back corner of the coffee shop was where they kept the small bookshelf, and I had indeed been looking through the books a few minutes earlier. But how could they know that? The only person who had been near the bookshelf was the barista, and they hadn't said anything about it. I hadn't posted anything related to the bookshelf or the books. I quickly checked my profile settings, ensuring my location and posts weren't tagged with any details about where I was. Nothing. I didn't share my location in any posts unless I specifically mentioned it. I hadn't used the check-in feature on this post, nor had I tagged the coffee shop. It was a simple picture, just a shot of my drink with nothing to hint at my whereabouts. My heart started to race. The person who had commented seemed to know things about me that no one could have guessed. It wasn't just random, they were watching me, maybe even following me. I stared at the screen for a long time, wondering if I should block the account or maybe even report it. But something held me back. I felt like if I did, I might be closing the door on something important. The next notification came quickly, like they were waiting for my reaction. This time the comment was even more personal. "You looked a little nervous when you picked up your phone just now. Maybe it's because you're wondering how I know these things." My skin went cold. I had just checked my phone when I'd seen the comment about the books. There was no way they could have known that unless they were watching me in real time. The comment sent a chill through me. I wasn't sure what to do. I could feel my pulse in my ears, the thumping growing louder. My mind raced, running through every possibility. Had someone been following me around the coffee shop? Was this all a coincidence, or was there something more sinister at play? I wasn't sure if I should leave, or even if it was safe to stay. My mind screamed that I should go home, lock the door, and never come back. But I couldn't let this go unanswered. I typed back a simple, shaky response. "Who are you? How do you know these things?" Then I hit send and sat back, waiting for a reply. My hands were trembling. The seconds felt like hours as I waited for the screen to light up again. I half expected the person to respond with something even more chilling, but there was nothing. For a long time, I stared at the blank screen. I finished my coffee quickly, feeling an overwhelming need to leave. I grabbed my bag and walked out of the coffee shop, the weight of the phone still in my hand. As I stepped outside, I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone watching from the corner. But there was no one. Just the usual flow of people on the street, oblivious to the dread that was now hanging in the pit of my stomach. That night, I deleted the post and blocked the user. I never heard from them again, but the unease never fully left. I started to feel paranoid whenever I checked my social media, wondering who else might be watching. In the coffee shop, I haven't been back since. Every time I drive past it, I can't shake the feeling that someone might be watching from the window, waiting to comment on something I hadn't even noticed. Story 27. The evening had settled into a quiet calm as I walked out of the office building. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, and the parking lot was nearly empty. The lights overhead flickered sporadically, casting long shadows on the pavement. I had just finished a late shift, and I was eager to get home, unwind, and forget about the stress of the day. I stepped into the cool night air, breathing in the crisp breeze. My footsteps echoed across the lot as I walked toward my car, parked in the far corner. The lot was mostly deserted, save for a few other cars parked near the entrance. I had parked far away from the building for some peace and quiet, but now that I was walking alone in the dim light, I couldn't help but feel uneasy. As I neared my car, I heard something behind me. At first, it was just a faint sound, like the rustling of leaves or someone walking at a distance. But then it grew louder, distinct footsteps echoing in rhythm with mine. I paused, turning my head slightly, expecting to see someone from the office, perhaps another late worker walking to their car. But there was no one there. I shrugged it off, chalking it up to my nerves after a long day. But the footsteps persisted, and a chill ran down my spine. My heart began to race as I turned around completely, half expecting to see someone standing just behind me. That's when I saw him. A man stood a few feet away, his figure emerging from the shadows like something out of a nightmare. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and his face was partially obscured by a hood. In his hand he held a taser, the long prongs gleaming faintly in the dim light. A sickening grin spread across his face as he took a step closer. "I was hoping to catch you alone," he said, his voice smooth and unnervingly calm. My breath caught in my throat, and I froze. The world seemed to slow around me, and all I could focus on was the taser in his hand. My mind raced, trying to think of any way to escape, but I felt paralyzed, my body unwilling to respond. "Well, what do you want?" I managed to stammer, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to remain composed. The man took another step forward, the grin on his face widening. He seemed to be enjoying my fear, his eyes gleaming with something dark and predatory. I tried to back away, but my legs felt like lead, as if they were rooted to the ground. "I'm just trying to have a little fun," he said, his tone light, as if this were some kind of game. "You've been walking alone in the dark, and I thought it'd be nice to get to know you better." My heart pounded in my chest, the adrenaline flooding my system as I realized just how vulnerable I was. I had no one to help, no one nearby to hear my screams. The parking lot felt like a vast, empty expanse, and I was completely alone with this man. I glanced at my phone, hoping for a signal, but of course there was nothing. My fingers trembled as I gripped the edge of my keys, clutching them like a lifeline. "Stay back," I said, forcing the words out despite the fear choking my throat. My voice sounded weak, but I had to try something. "I'll call the police." The man's smile never faltered. He took another step forward, and the glint of the taser's prongs sent a jolt of terror through me. He was too close now. I could feel the weight of the weapon in his hand, the silent threat of what would happen if he used it. "Go ahead," he taunted. "Call them. They'll never get here in time." The words sent a wave of panic over me, and my mind scrambled for any sort of escape plan. My car was right there, only a few feet away. But would I be able to reach it before he caught up to me? My keys were in my hand, but they didn't feel like enough to defend myself against a man holding a taser. I took another cautious step backward, trying to put more space between us. He noticed my movement and tilted his head slightly, as though amused. "You think you can run? You think you can get away?" I didn't answer. I didn't dare to. My mind was racing, and my pulse thundered in my ears as I finally managed to break free from my frozen state. I turned and sprinted toward my car, my heart hammering in my chest. The sound of my own footsteps was drowned out by the pounding of my heart as I fumbled with the keys in my hand. Just as I reached the door, I heard him behind me. He was fast, too fast. I could feel his presence closing in, the anticipation of what would happen next sending a jolt of panic through me. With shaking hands, I finally unlocked the door and threw myself into the car, slamming the door shut just as I heard him call out. "I don't think you're safe," he said, his voice calm, almost friendly. "I'll be watching." The words hung in the air, their weight settling over me as I slammed the car into reverse and sped out of the parking lot. My heart still raced as I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see his shadowy figure following me. But there was nothing. The parking lot was empty now, just as it had been when I first walked out. I drove home, hands still trembling on the wheel, my mind replaying the encounter over and over. It had been a close call, or had he simply been playing with me, testing how far he could push? I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, that this wasn't the last time I would see him. That night, I locked all the doors and windows, keeping the lights on throughout the house. I couldn't sleep, couldn't quiet my mind. I knew it wasn't over. And as the hours ticked by, I realized that the man wasn't just a stranger. He was someone who had been watching me, someone who knew exactly how to strike fear into my heart. and I knew deep down that I hadn't escaped. I had only bought myself a little more time. Story 28. It was late, the kind of late where the streets are empty and the city feels quieter, more isolated. I had missed the last bus, and walking home from the station seemed like the best option. I'd taken this route 100 times before down the main street, then a quick shortcut through an alley behind the block. It saved me a few minutes, and I liked the feeling of the cool night air as I passed by the narrow passageways that separated the buildings. The alley was dimly lit, the only light coming from a flickering street lamp at the far end. Trash littered the ground, and the smell of rotting food and damp concrete hung thick in the air. As I walked, I kept my head down, listening to the echo of my footsteps, counting the seconds until I'd be out on the next street. I always tried to walk quickly through the alley, but tonight there was something off. Something about the quiet that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I chalked it up to the late hour, trying to shake the uneasy feeling. But then I heard a soft scraping noise from behind a dumpster to my left. My heart skipped, and I instinctively picked up my pace, my shoes slapping against the wet pavement. The sound continued, like something or someone was moving in the shadows. I tried to tell myself it was just a stray cat, or maybe a homeless person rummaging through the garbage, but my instincts were on high alert. Without warning, a man stepped out from behind the dumpster. He was tall, his face obscured by the hood of a dark sweatshirt, the fabric pulled low over his eyes. In his hands he held a coil of rope and a roll of duct tape. The moment I saw it, my breath caught in my throat and my feet froze. A chill ran down my spine as the man took a slow step toward me, his movements deliberate and controlled. "Hey," he said, his voice rough and low, as though he wasn't used to speaking to people at all. "I need your help." I swallowed hard, my heart pounding in my chest. My mind raced, scrambling for a way out, but there was nowhere to go. The alley was narrow, and the only exit was the way I had come. I could feel the adrenaline starting to flood my system, the panic creeping in. The rope and duct tape were unmistakable. The man wasn't asking for help, he was planning something. "What do you want?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady, though it came out shakier than I had intended. I took a cautious step back, my body already calculating the best way to escape if things went south. The man didn't move, but his eyes, barely visible beneath the hood, seemed to be studying me. I had no idea what kind of trouble I had just walked into, but I had to act quickly. "I just need you to stay still," he said, the rope shifting slightly in his grip. "Won't take long. Just need a little time." My blood ran cold. It was clear now this wasn't a simple request for help. This was a threat. Every alarm bell in my head was screaming at me to run, but I didn't. I couldn't. I was too close to him, and if I ran, I might not make it out of the alley in time. I tried to think, to stay calm. I had to keep the conversation going, keep him talking, make him hesitate, anything to buy me some time. "What do you want me for?" I asked, my voice now steady enough to sound more demanding than scared. The man's lips curled slightly into what could have been a smile, though it was hard to tell under the shadows. "Not much," he replied, taking another step forward, the rope swaying in his hand. "Just need someone who won't scream too loud." He said it casually, like it was no big deal, but the meaning behind his words hit me like a ton of bricks. This was serious. I had to find a way out, and fast. I kept my eyes locked on him, my mind racing through every possible escape plan. There was a fire exit on the building to my right, I remembered. It was only a few yards away, but the alley was narrow, and he was between me and it. If I could just make it around him. I took a step sideways, my body shifting just enough to angle myself toward the fire escape. He noticed, his head jerking up, and his eyes locked onto mine with a cold intensity. "Oh, don't try it," he said, his tone suddenly sharp. "It'll be worse for you if you do." The fear surged again, but I pushed it down, forcing myself to think logically. I had to keep him talking. I couldn't let him take control of the situation. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep the edge of fear from my voice. "Why are you doing this?" He paused, and for a moment I thought I saw something like hesitation flicker across his face. But it was gone almost instantly. "Doesn't matter who I am," he said, his grip tightening on the rope. "It's what I need you for. That's all you need to know." I didn't know what kind of sick situation I had walked into, but I could feel the time slipping away, and I couldn't waste another second. I decided to act. Until I lunged to the right, dodging toward the fire escape. But as I did, I felt a rough hand grab my wrist. The force was too much, pulling me back toward him. I struggled, twisting in his grip, but he was stronger than I expected. The panic began to set in, my chest tightening as I kicked out, desperate to break free. And then, just as quickly as it started, there was a noise. A car's engine revved somewhere at the end of the alley, its headlights cutting through the darkness. The man froze, his grip loosening for just a fraction of a second, but it was enough. I wrenched myself away from him, stumbling toward the fire escape and grabbing onto the metal ladder. "Stop!" The man yelled, but I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I didn't care if I was making noise or if he was chasing me. All I cared about was getting away. I clambered up the fire escape, my legs shaking with adrenaline, until I reached the roof. From there, I sprinted across the rooftops, the sound of my breath heavy in my ears. I didn't stop until I reached the next street, my heart still racing. I didn't look back, but I knew I had narrowly escaped something much worse than a late-night shortcut, and I would never take that alley again. Story 29. I stood in line at the store, casually scanning the shelves for anything I might have forgotten to grab. The line was longer than usual, with a few people ahead of me and a few more behind. I could feel someone close, a presence just a little too close. But I didn't think much of it at first. I was used to crowded spaces, and the feeling passed quickly as I focused on my list. But then I noticed something out of the corner of my eye, something I couldn't ignore. The man behind me was holding his phone in a strange position, angled just under my skirt. My heart skipped a beat. At first, I tried to convince myself it was an accident, that maybe he was just trying to check his messages. But the angle was too deliberate, too precise. I could feel my stomach churn as I turned my head, my eyes narrowing. I didn't want to make a scene, but I couldn't just stand there pretending nothing was happening. Slowly, I turned to face him, my voice low but firm. "What do you think you're doing?" I asked, my gaze hardening. The man froze, and for a split second, his eyes darted to his phone. I could see his fingers twitch, like he was debating whether to put it away or make a run for it. He didn't get the chance to decide. I took a step forward, blocking his path, forcing him to look me in the eyes. "Is that what you've been doing this whole time?" I asked, my voice louder now, more demanding. His face went pale, and he seemed to shrink back, his mouth opening and closing as if he were trying to say something but couldn't find the words. I reached for the phone, grabbing it from his hand with a quick motion. The man's face contorted with panic, his eyes darting around the store as if looking for an escape. He made a sharp, sudden movement toward me, but before he could react further, he bolted. The phone slipped from my grasp, and for a moment I just stood there, frozen in disbelief. The man was already halfway across the store, weaving through aisles and pushing past other customers. I didn't know what to do. My heart was racing, and my legs felt like lead. I could barely catch my breath as I stood there holding his phone. The sound of his hurried footsteps grew fainter, and I watched as he disappeared through the exit, leaving the store behind in a rush. My mind was spinning, and I had no idea what to make of the situation. All I knew was that something terrible had just happened, and I had to act quickly. I looked down at the phone in my hand. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. With trembling hands, I unlocked it. There was a gallery app open, and my stomach dropped as I saw the hundreds of videos, each one tagged with a location and date. I could feel the blood draining from my face as I scrolled through the thumbnails. Every single one was of a woman in a similar position, many of them unknowingly captured in public spaces, just like me. The videos ranged from grocery stores to coffee shops, parks, and even on public transportation. I felt sick to my stomach, a wave of nausea hitting me as I realized what I had stumbled upon. This wasn't just some random incident. This man had been doing this for a long time, capturing countless women in compromising situations. My skin crawled as I thought of all the people he had targeted before me, how many times he had gotten away with it without anyone noticing. I walked toward the store's counter, still holding the phone, my mind reeling with the realization of what had just happened. The cashier looked up at me, her eyes widening when she saw the phone in my hand. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice unsure. I nodded, though I didn't feel okay. "I think this man was recording me without my consent," I said quietly, still shaken. The cashier's face changed, her expression hardening with recognition. That's not the first time something like this has happened here," she whispered. She glanced around nervously before leaning in closer. "We've had reports before, but no one ever caught him in the act." My blood ran cold. How many other women had he filmed? How many other times had this happened, unnoticed or ignored? The cashier took the phone from my hands and immediately started dialing the store manager. I felt a knot in my stomach tighten as I realized I had just become part of something bigger, something I couldn't control. The manager arrived within minutes, his face tight with concern. He immediately called the police, and within a few moments, officers arrived to take my statement. They listened intently as I described what had happened, their faces grim as they examined the phone. The officer in charge, a woman with short dark hair, flipped through the videos with a practiced eye. She didn't need to ask any more questions, the evidence was all there. After a few minutes, she looked up at me, her face pale. "We've been trying to catch him for months," she said, her voice steady but with a hint of frustration. "He's been using different phones, different apps, and he's very careful. He knows how to cover his tracks." I felt a mixture of relief and anger. He had been doing this for months, maybe even longer. He had been able to hide his actions, slip under the radar, while the women he filmed had no idea. But now, thanks to a mistake, or maybe it wasn't he had been caught. His entire secret life was in my hands. The police told me they would look through the footage and investigate his identity. They took the phone into evidence and assured me that they would track him down. But as I left the store, my thoughts were consumed by the faces of the women in those videos. They were strangers, just like me, but now we shared something dark, something that tied us together. I couldn't shake the feeling of violation. I had caught a glimpse into the twisted world of someone who preyed on the vulnerability of others. And though the police were confident they would catch him, I couldn't help but feel the weight of the other women who had been unaware of the camera's watchful eye. As much as I wanted to push the memory away, it lingered with me, haunting me with every step. Story 30. The office building was eerily quiet as I worked late into the night. The hum of the fluorescent lights above and the soft tapping of my keyboard were the only sounds that broke the stillness. I had grown accustomed to the solitude, but tonight something felt different. The usual calm had been replaced by a heavy tension, the air thick with the kind of silence that pressed in on you. It was nearing midnight when I decided to take a short break. I stood up from my desk, stretched, and walked toward the elevator, hoping a quick ride down would shake off the nagging sense of unease. The office was dead silent, every other floor deserted, and the elevator at the far end of the hall was waiting for me. I pressed the button to summon it, my footsteps echoing in the otherwise empty corridor. The doors opened immediately, which was strange given that I had only just pressed the button. I was sure I hadn't heard the elevator word to life, yet here it was, standing open in front of me. At first, I didn't think much of it. Maybe someone else had called it and simply left without taking the ride. But as I stepped closer, my stomach twisted and I froze. Inside the elevator stood a man. He was tall, dressed in a dark suit that didn't seem to fit the time of night. His hair was unkempt, and his face was obscured by the low light from the elevator's dim bulbs. He didn't move or say anything as I stepped closer, and I couldn't make out his expression from the shadows. What struck me most, however, was the way his hand was gripping something behind his back, something shiny. A knife, the reflection of the steel glinting in the low light. For a moment I stood paralyzed, unsure of what to do. My mind raced, trying to process the scene in front of me. Was this a prank? A misunderstanding? I felt the cold weight of fear settle into my chest. I had no idea who this man was, and the knife in his hand told me that his intentions were far from friendly. "Can I help you?" I finally managed to ask, my voice a little too shaky to sound casual. I wasn't sure whether I should run or try to de-escalate the situation, but my body wouldn't allow me to move. I didn't want to show fear, but I couldn't help it. The man didn't answer immediately. He just stood there, his eyes fixed on me. The silence stretched on, each passing second feeling like an eternity. He wasn't stepping forward, but he wasn't stepping back either. It was as if he was waiting for me to make the first move. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to run, but my feet were glued to the floor. Then, finally, his lips parted, and his voice was low and raspy, almost a whisper. "Get in," he said, his eyes still locked on mine. There was no hint of emotion in his voice, just a cold command. For a second, I considered bolting. My mind screamed at me to turn and run back to my office, but I knew the elevator was right in front of me, and the exit was several floors down. If he wanted to catch me, he could do it easily. My heart pounded in my chest as I tried to think of a way out of this situation. "No," I said firmly, my voice trembling more than I'd like. "I don't know you. I'm not getting in with you." I saw the flicker of irritation cross his face, though it was hard to read in the dim light. His grip on the knife tightened slightly, and I could hear the faint scrape of metal against metal. That sound alone was enough to send a chill down my spine. My mind screamed for me to move, to do something, but I felt frozen in place. The man's lips curled into something that could have been a smile, though it was far too cold and unsettling to be comforting. "You're not going to like what happens if you don't," he said, his voice a low threat. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my mind racing with thoughts of how to get out of this alive. I didn't have any weapons, no means of defending myself, but I had to stay calm, I reminded myself. Panicking would only make things worse. I looked down at my phone in my hand, then quickly back up at the man, calculating my options. "Why are you doing this?" I managed to ask, hoping to buy myself some time, though my voice came out a little too breathless. "What do you want from me?" "Hey." The man didn't answer immediately, just stood there, his eyes never leaving me. I could hear his breathing, steady and controlled, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that he was standing in front of me with a knife, or the fact that I couldn't get any sense of why he was doing this. Then, as suddenly as he'd appeared, the elevator doors closed behind him with a soft ding. I couldn't tell if he was just testing me, or if he was preparing to act. The small movement, combined with his proximity to the weapon, made me realize that I might not have much time left. In a desperate move, I stepped back, hitting the button to close the elevator doors and rapidly pressing for the ground floor. As the elevator began to descend, I felt the tension in my body ease just slightly, though I was still watching him in the corner of my eye. The man didn't make any move to stop me. For a moment, the elevator was just a small box of silence as we descended, but I wasn't sure if that meant I was safe. When the elevator finally hit the ground floor, the doors opened. I rushed out, my heart still pounding, and looked back, expecting to see him following me, but he wasn't there. The man was gone, vanished as suddenly as he'd appeared. I stood there, frozen in place, unsure if what I'd just experienced was real or some sort of hallucination. I quickly bolted out of the building, my body trembling as I made my way to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys and I couldn't get in fast enough. Once I was inside, I locked the doors and just sat there for a while, breathing in shallow gasps. The elevator had opened on its own, the man had been there, and somehow by some strange twist of fate, I'd made it out alive. But I knew, deep down, that I hadn't imagined it. The knife, the way he stood there watching me, there was no mistaking it. Something in that building didn't feel right anymore. I couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the man's disappearance, something darker was lurking in the shadows.